If you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Someone is trying to teach me a lesson in futility. Why am I the only one who isn't killed?
They will run you dizzy. They will pile falsehood on top of falsehood until you can't tell a lie from the truth, and you won't even want to. That's how the powerful keep their power. Don't you read the papers?
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
I'm going to get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's going to happen to you?
What?
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Chris Kendall back on the show. Chris is the host of Hoaxbusters Call. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Tim. It's hot and humid in Oklahoma. I could give you a weather report.
Full blazing summer there already?
It's approaching. No, it's not full blazing quite yet. Not for here. Well, get about 110, and that'll be up closer to full blazing.
That'll be like late July, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
We're not there yet, but trying to acclimation process.
Well, that's life in the temperate zone, right?
Right. Yeah. Most of the time, it's decent weather. It's not too bad right now, but it's just you're getting the hints of what's coming up.
The sting's in the air already, right?
Yeah, it's just saying, summer's coming up, everybody. Yeah.
And we have the global warming reports, hot summer, scorch, 100 degrees in New York City, and they'll have news reports about global warming because it's hot in late July in New York City or something.
Yeah, it's going to be news.
Heat wave scorches the Northeast. Could this be the beginning of the end?
Could it be the beginning of the end, or maybe summer?
I heard the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history was a heat wave in the 1920s, from what I understand.
Yeah, they're no joke, really. I mean, I've heard Australia had I think the worst, which was I think 30 people dropped dead, just straight up dropped dead from the heat.
Mm-hmm.
And untold others died as a result, maybe following that. But just really, and this was back, around around that same era, I think, what you just said, early 1900s.
Before the era of climate control. I think the British air conditioners first popped up at movie theaters and department stores, surprisingly.
Yeah.
That's why people would spend the nickels on movies all afternoon if they could.
Right, so the movies are making out pretty good at first. It's but there is a point where we've had it here where it's okay, air conditioners just stop working. They just the air conditioner says, I'm done. This is more than I can handle. And it just, we've had it that bad here. Yeah, gets that hot. But I remember it when I was a kid being hot, so I don't think it's new. But
yes, yeah, I remember. I lived in a house that had no air conditioning. It had 2 units that had broken. It was a larger home, but we just kind of persevered. And it's kind of, you were hot, you just didn't think about it.
No, you just don't. Yeah, you just don't focus on it. You just yeah.
Now
okay,
I'm spoiled.
I'm
spoiled. I'm like, I go to my house, it's like 80 degrees. Like, yeah, it's terrible in here. Get it down to 72. It's ridiculous. You know.
Oh, I know. Yeah, and then I'll get acclimated, and then I'll go into, like you're saying, a store or somewhere like that, and it's like, okay, I'm absolutely freezing to death in here. It's just it's not, yeah. It's like, my grandfather too. I don't think he had air. He had cold air in his whole entire life. Like I think it would kill him, literally kill him, if he stayed too long into cold air, at that time. But it's all what you can get used to,
So tonight, you've been doing a couple shows on this book that I have a copy of. I haven't yet read. It's on my stack of yet to be read books. That the Mystic Chords of Memory, and we're talking tonight about sort of culture creation, the use of myth in creating history in order to, I guess, control the culture and control the direction of culture and how we view ourselves and our country. Of course, this is done through a lot of. I have a quote here. It's kind of interesting. It goes like something like, as a result, it says, where it is? Let me get my notes here. This is an article called "Weaponizing the Arts" by Paul and Philip Collins. I interviewed him a while back talking about weaponized art, and they write. Popular opinion tends to regard philosophical discourse as a province of academia's hierophants. There's good reason for this self-imposed intellectual segregation. On a theoretical level, philosophy can be somewhat tedious, given the field's justifiable insistence upon clarity of definitions. Philosophy is replete with specialized terminology that typically requires explanation by theoreticians. As a result, few people are eager to engage in discussions concerning various Weltanschauungs populating the marketplace of ideas. Yet philosophical outlooks abound, and they are held by both neophyte and adept. Thus, the question arises, how are belief systems engendered among pop culture's novice-level thinkers? Everybody, the hoi polloi, the man on the street. According to Christian apologist Ravi Zacharias, most people are not introduced to philosophy through the superstructure of theory. Instead, they are exposed to an infrastructure of the arts, which has shaped the national mindset in everything from determining war strategy to electing presidents to finding one's identity in cars and deodorants. So I thought that might be a useful quote to kick off tonight's conversation. Okay, how do you want to get into this? So sort of this book is this fascinating book, and this whole idea of how our reality is actually constructed for us.
Well, I was talking to John Adams about this book, and in general about books of this type. It doesn't seem like it's something that is definitely not part of mainstream thinking. It's not something that you're going to run across in some kind of panel discussion on culture, politics. Generally, it's not something that's going to be referred to in certain circles. But when you run across a book like this, where you're kind of going through it, it's like, well, yeah, like how, like the Rockefellers set up. I was trying to find that chapter, but I can't. But I could paraphrase it. Where they set up houses to look like what the houses would have been like in a certain period of time, to establish what would be regarded as referred to as like American heritage. Like what does that exactly mean, though? So that if like this book refers to instances where, well, that sort of thing for the most part has been manufactured or essentially made up to a large extent. And so the idea of, what is American, well, that all had to be cooked up. What it means to be an American, because how old is this country? So when did the colonization start and all of that? Well, if you go back to the first colonists up until now, you're talking about a relatively new culture or society, relatively speaking, with no real history and true cultural development at that point that's distinct and separate from anything else, So that had to be established somehow. And then sort of what this book goes into is like, well, how did that come about? And well, you just make it up.
I guess this whole idea of these American heritage sites or something, but how it was. So just make it more like it's more like a museum, more like a theme park, as opposed to a actual attempt to convey to people what life was really like, what really occurred. It's shaping a certain identity, so you can shape their behavior in the here and now, as opposed to just giving people information, educating them on history.
I could read this a couple of paragraphs here out of this chapter 11. Kind of touches on what I just got through stating. During the 20s and the 30s, more specifically the decades span 1924 to 34, a very few rich collectors and small group of prestigious museums fundamentally transformed the presentation of Americana to the people of the United States. They created precedents and set standards that still affect the nature of collective memory in this country, even for those who have chosen to break with such precedents and wish to transform the standards. In addition to these figures already discussed, such as Electra, Havemeyer, Webb, Henry Francis DuPont, R.T.H. Halsey, we now have primarily in view Henry Ford, John D. Rockefeller Jr., Robert Weeks DeForest, and a few latecomers who appeared on the scene in the mid-1930s, like Maxime Karlik in Boston. During these years, great private collectors emerged from protected cocoons into directly to be major museums. The collectors collaborated closely with existing museums in their presentation of Americana. Some acted and became boldly innovative and transformed themselves invariably in the name of education and quote-unquote authenticity, even if not consistently in their spirit. Because Henry Ford had an obsession with authenticating the origin of quote-unquote Mary Had a Little Lamb, for instance, he saved quote-unquote the Redstone Schoolhouse, renamed the Wayside School, and published a 40-page booklet about the genesis of the poem. A considerable amount of invaluable historic preservation occurred, along with some questionable reconstructions. A fair number of transplanted structures and a few phony ones with flimsy historical pedigrees. So, and then last time I talked about this, I went into Henry Rockefeller, which I think a lot of people are familiar with his quote, history is bunk.
Or Henry Ford, right?
Henry Ford,
yeah.
Right. And then...
history is bunk, and there he is creating history.
Very interested, too, in creating history and setting up, like I just said, the Wayside School, and giving sort of a backstory to Mary Had a Little Lamb, which was, according to this, questionable, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, like somebody like Henry Ford and these people of wealth having this interest in preserving history. And I think about that. Like, so why is Henry history is bunk for so gung ho on preserving history? So I thought that was interesting.
Well, the oligarchs, the ruling class, the oligarchs, the people of wealth, great wealth, they have an interest in shaping the large middle class, determining their tastes, their habits. Of course, we all know Edward Bernays and his book Propaganda, and who hired him, and his idea that all our tastes or habits are determined by men we never meet. This constitutes America's secret government. But through these museums, through the teaching of history, the American Historical Association, the endowment of universities and colleges, they'll empower or they'll hire a professional class, people with PhDs and doctorates to tell us what history is and what to think. And because they have the seal of officialdom behind them, we're all forced to accept it, and accept it as truth, because that these are the experts telling us what it is, despite the fact that often just a cursory examination of these subjects leads one to believe that history is indeed bunk, on many subjects and many issues. But they have at their disposal, because they have mass communication, they have universities, they have the resources, and obviously if you have these vast resources, you're going to leverage them culturally and politically to amass even more wealth and more control. And that's what an oligarch does. That's why he's an oligarch. Otherwise, he wouldn't be an oligarch, I guess. So.
Right. So they have some vested interest in that. I would think it's sort of a peculiar interest. Like what? Yeah. Why is it so important that they spend so much of their wealth on doing these big preservation projects and museums? And I think that's museums and exhibits, that sort of thing is sort of in those circles, oligarchs, to them very important. But at the same time, you're thinking, okay, so this is all sort of maybe a bit mundane, maybe a bit inconsequential. But no, the more you kind of go into, I hate calling it conspiracy ideas, because I think that's such a loaded word. But the idea that our whole culture and our whole identity as wherever it is you happen to live, if you're European, you have this certain identity. If you're American, you have a certain identity. Something that goes. So you say I'm an American. There's all this imagery that is attached to that, and what that means. And then there is also this historical propping up of that idea, what that means. And that is, I think, it is important on a certain level, because it really puts us in as far as like I said, creating identity. It shapes and molds that idea, and it's going to give you imagery. It's going to give you stories. It's going to give you things that are put in front of you that are by its presentation. I think that's important. It's like by presenting certain things in a certain way, that is a form of communication. Like if you're going to put something in an exhibit, so obviously you're not going to stick something in an exhibit that's not important on some level, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen that with so-called modern art, where you have an exhibit that is, and this is no kidding, like leftover party favors and empty bottles sitting on a table with confetti. And then the staff goes in and starts to clean it up. And say, you just wiped out $100,000, $200,000 or whatever art installation. What are you doing? And so we thought it was a party. We were cleaning up. No, it's art. But it's like, it was like, well, obviously trash. So they picked it up and stuck it in those big hefty bags and put it in the dumpster. But it's like, well, what was it doing there?
Was the dumpster a piece of artwork too?
I don't know if they checked that. Maybe they should have checked that first before they go throwing trash in it. But because
if I were the custodian or the janitor who got in trouble for that, I would have said, "Well, I'm an artist too, and this is my statement. I'm saying something."
Yeah.
Here, so.
But I mean, yeah, think about that. Like let that sink in. It's like, well, anything that's in a museum is going to achieve a certain status, is going to achieve a certain level of prominence within the mass consciousness on some level. Of course, you got the Apollo capsule in there, and you could go look at that online. And it's like, I don't know why would they put that out in public, because the idea that thing was on the moon is just the most ridiculous presentation I've ever. I just don't know how that even flies, but there it is, and it's in a museum, and then it's, I guess I should say this too, as far as what I'm getting at. Like, you have in religion, you have objects of veneration, right? You have your statues of priests and stuff like that, and then they have this special position. You go into a church, and they're not going to be on the floor; they're going to be in a prominently displayed, and they're going to have, by way of the care that's put into making this iconography and the way that it's positioned, communicates, this certain things about it, and then but in the religious context, they're obviously objects of veneration. Same thing with a chair or something that's in a museum. So you're going into the Henry Ford's museum or something, and you're looking at these chairs that he's put in there to give you the history of chairs. Well, it's something, for some reason, it's significant, and you regard it as significant just by its context that it's placed in. So you think about that as coming into this industrial revolution, and then putting these inanimate objects on display like that, and what it communicates. So it's kind of like I wouldn't go maybe as far as to say a new religion per se, but in a way that it's sort of borrowing from, maybe not even necessarily borrowing from a religion, but sort of a parallel to a religion, where you have these sort of objects of veneration put on display. And then you go into a museum. I'm not saying museums are bad or necessarily or anything, because I like going to museums, and I think, look at some interesting stuff. But then going through a book like this, next time I go into a museum, I'm going to certainly see it in a different light.
Yeah.
Because you can't take it on face value. But see, you're looking at actual objects. In many cases, I'm sure that a lot of it's completely authentic. On the other hand, it may not be at all. But then again too, you have to accept a lot of things about what you're looking at, and what this real significance of it is, and then take the story behind it on face value as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, just walking into the Lincoln Memorial, you've been to the Lincoln Memorial, right?
I have not been I've been in Washington, D.C., but I never made it over to the Lincoln Memorial.
Well, Lincoln's 30 feet tall.
He was a heck of a guy.
And that's without his hat on. But he's in a temple, right? You're thinking, why this? Really? I mean, he's in a temple. He's in like a Greek temple, something you might see in Greece somewhere, and he's joined the pantheon of the gods, I guess. But obviously Lincoln wasn't 25, 30 feet tall. It wasn't giant. He wasn't made of marble. And so, if you just want to, no serious historian really is going to walk in there and think this is conveying an accurate portrayal of a man that once lived, who occupied the White House. It's pure propaganda, and it's constructed to be that. If you go the paintings, if you walk into the Capitol, the paintings that are on the ceilings, it's almost like the very similar to the Sistine Chapel. You know, where you have paintings on the ceiling, and you have these all types of course, the Masonic imagery is overbearing.
I would think a word to describe Washington, D.C. would be ostentatious.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I went there, I had this sense of, kind of like the sense of you going into like a church, but instead of going into just a church, it's like the whole area, the whole layout of the land is in church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is you know, the civic religion of
definitely.
the nation. Yeah.
That's definitely the takeaway of visiting there. It's just like, this is something that, this is not a city. This is something entirely different. Now, it may serve the function as a city on some level. At the same time, this is more like what am I searching for? It's like when you go to Mecca or you go to visit Jerusalem, you go on like a sabbatical. I'm not saying that's what I did, but I'm saying that, like, when you're in a place like that, you get a sense that when you visit here, you're kind of in going to the Holy Land. Like, this is a very significant place. This is a very significant piece of geography. And everything around you in that area, like the mall in Washington and all the architecture and stuff like that, just screams that out. Like, hey, this is special. Hey, this is significant. And it's can you imagine the work that's gone into all the sculptures and all the artwork there, and all the building facades and the construction there, and the artifices and all that, and the
well, it's psychological,
just on and on, all
psychological warfare.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's almost like if you've ever seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Jimmy Stewart, Mr. Smith, and he's doing the tour of the monuments.
Oh no, I need to watch that.
You need to watch that. That's kind of like the effect they want, where he imagines the speeches of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and Abraham Lincoln, and, you know, although Jefferson and Lincoln would, you know, completely opposite, but they meld them all together. You know, which is a function of these monuments, you know, is to kind of create an overall image, just patriotic image of America, symbolism, and these speeches. And is that really the true history of the country? I was reading The Cultural Code War by Frances Stoner Saunders, and she's talking about the invocation of the deity of God in America and its founding and the Constitution. But she points out, I think correctly, that really this constant invocation of God wasn't really something that Americans did up until the Cold War, when those who were waging the Cold War needed to invoke God to fight godless communism. And this was in the 1950s. I think in 1954, there was the Bible Balloons Project, where they sent out tens of thousands of balloons with Bibles inside and floated them over the Iron Curtain.
Oh, really?
That would win the hearts and minds of the captured nations behind the Iron Curtain. But that's also the time when Congress added "One Nation Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, and "God We Trust" became the nation's official motto. And I think it was in Langley, when they opened up Langley in 1961, or I think 60 or 61, I think, when it opened up. And Allen Dulles had, in the lobby there, inscribed, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."
Now, that's in the CIA headquarters building, right?
Yeah.
That's right out in the lobby.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that in film and stuff. I think is it as you walk in the main doors?
Yes, you walk in the main doors.
Right there in the lobby on the left side.
And if you get past security, walk up the main lobby, and there's some stars of people who've given their lives for their country, that sort of thing. Inscribed on the wall there is that, you know, and ye shall know the truth in there.
Have you ever heard of I'm going to forget the name of it. It's in San Francisco. It's the Masonic is what it's referred to now, and it's this massive building in downtown San Francisco. And so I ran across that a couple of weeks ago. I know there's one. Me and John talked about this before. There's one in Los Angeles. This is one that's it's like that, but it's what made me recall this is what you said. Like it's dedicated to all the Masons that have lost their lives in the service, the Masonry.
The Masonry.
I'm like, what is Masonry then? I thought it was a do-gooder organization where they just kind of sit around and they smoke cigarettes and drink coffee and talk about good deeds they're going to do.
Yeah, play ping pong, get drunk and play ping pong or something. As the Simpsons said.
Yeah, get drunk and play ping pong. So these are like ping pong fatalities and overdosing on what are you talking about? Died in the service of Masonry. Doesn't that fly in the face of what Masonry presents themselves as being?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's one thing that stood out to me. The Masonic. Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting to look at it. There's a lot of pictures online. It's at 1111 something Street in
1111. Huh?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. It's 1111 Street address, and it's in San Francisco. But yeah, oddly enough, I ran across that. I listened to this No Agenda Show podcast from time to time. It's pretty good. They go into some interesting stuff. I don't know if you've listened to that ever.
No, I've never I'm aware of it. Never listened to it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily. Of course, it's not as far as I would go. As far as stuff being contrived and a lot of stuff that being presented out there as being sort of completely scripted and made up. I don't know, but they do touch around that a lot. You know, the idea of a lot of politics just being pure theater, stuff like that. So it's actually a guy that used to be on MTV a while back, and then John Dvorak is he was a tech writer for years. But it's a pretty interesting program. But anyway, the map is where I ran across the Masonic, and but the map was all the human feces that's in San Francisco now because of the homeless issue.
Is that where they have the app where you can call it in or something?
Yeah, you have an app and you report the poop, and it puts of course a graphic on there to let you know where it's at. And it's like they said some Silicon Valley people came up with that because of I don't know if it's just a spoof or it actually has some function because well, I don't know. I guess if you definitely want to avoid human feces on the ground, but apparently it's all over the place there, and it's a real problem. At the same time, they have these baggies that and I guess you can get fined for like not picking up after your dog. But I don't know. I didn't mean to get all sidetracked, but I have a tendency to do that sometimes. I go off the rails. Yeah, the Masonic. So you were bringing up the like these memorials and stuff. It's just where that is such an important part of our culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's now I live in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is close to Fort Sill. It's sort of a military town because the base is so big. I think it's like the biggest artillery base in the United States, and you go to the park. You go down to the park, the public parks, and it's all military memorials.
Mm-hmm.
They have a tank down there. Of course, it's decommissioned tank down in McMahon Park, and I I think I counted them last time. I can't remember how many different war memorials there are down there. But that's something that's vitally important in our culture.
Yeah, and the memorials and the museums don't really teach about the complexities or intrigues that led to these wars and the interests that brought on these wars. It's all about the memory of the fallen and the sacrifice that was given on the battlefields, and they don't really educate the public on perhaps why these wars were fought in the first place. And in fact, the question that is considered in poor taste. If you've ever been to the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., it's a rather large, ostentatious thing, I think, at least in my estimations. And it's, it looks very fascist in my, the way I look at it. But it's just all, I mean, if you're a serious historian of the war itself, these things are just an insult to your intelligence, because they don't really project, they don't really educate anybody. They're there to manipulate or to propagandize the viewing public about these events.
Yeah, to strum the mystic chords of memory, like Lincoln said, so that and then that it's going to serve a specific function too, and it's not, they don't put all this money into all the marble and all the craftsmanship that goes into that, because some of these are really impressive. I'm sure that memorial you described is probably, I recollect. Yeah, I did. Is it the one that's like
it's got a pool of water, fountains, and circular.
Okay, and it has like really this tall like edifice where it has these inscriptions on it, and it's is it the one that has sort of Egyptian? Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, kind of stuff on it. Yeah, okay, I think I know the one that you're referring to.
And then the FDR Memorial goes into that. The FDR Memorial has like 4 sections for each term. It was all.
Really? Wow.
He elected elected 4 times. I wonder if the 4th one's a little smaller because he died in office. Less than he only was a little more than a month in office for his 4th term. But
yeah, just leave it. They should have just left it like unfinished.
Yeah,
like worked on it for a month and then stopped. Yeah. But no, it's like you go and look at this stuff, and then the only impression that you could come away with, and then I believe that's the full intention of it, is that you have this sense of where reverence, awe, and reverence, and sort of this. It's going to invoke what would be akin to worship. What else could there possibly be for creating such a grand sculpture out of marble and granite and the effort that goes into that? Just hauling the material to the site is a feat of engineering. It's
well, you wouldn't believe that neither Lincoln nor FDR never had any critics or opponents during their presidencies, because they were such great men. They were just so popular, and it says one nation under God, but in reality, is a God is subordinated to the nation. It's Americanism, and God is
definitely,
as Reinhard Niebuhr said in the pages of Time, Life. He was a theologian. He was a Cold War theologian. He said that God was used as an instrument of national policy.
Definitely. Yeah.
So the relationship is inverted. And
definitely, yeah. I totally would agree with that.
And that's the problem, because now all of a sudden you're getting into idolatry, which Christians aren't supposed to do. Yet they do it when they have such veneration for their nation and such little regard for the commands of the Ten Commandments, like thou shalt not kill.
Yeah, and it's the very definition of idolatry. I don't know how else. I don't know how it gets out from under being just full frontal idolatry. But then, Well, I mean, and on the other hand, too, I do recognize as well, and I'm sure you do too. There's a lot of Christians that would say this, same thing. But then you have your Christian base, which probably represent maybe the majority even of kind of mainstream establishment Christianity that is doesn't blush at the going headlong in idolatry when it comes to the flag and America and all that. And interesting thing. John hit me too, which is like he hits me to all this stuff. It's like the stuff that John runs across is just it's always coming across something I haven't heard about before. And I posted it on the blog, which is that very thing where how Christianity was. I'm trying to get this guy's name. I'm at the post right now. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but well, his name is not this guy who's going into this, but it's how corporate America invented Christian America, one nation under God, and that's at hoaxbusterscall.com if anybody wants to, to check that out. Yeah. But that was, I thought, was really fairly profound as far as modern Christianity goes and how much influence the corporations had on the mainstream preachers around the era he refers to, and how they weren't really that clandestine about it. It was almost as if it was, but then at the same time too, to this day, it's not something that like I said, I haven't ran across it. That doesn't mean it's not out there, but I haven't run across it before, and how sort of overt that is. But I think that definitely goes in line with what we're talking about, because I think this is all kind of indicative of how, where you have the state and religion, and in a lot of respects, on a lot of different levels, they're not really separable.
No, they're not, and and you have to, in order to, I guess, to make sure the state does indeed have the mandate of heaven, you you claim that God is on our side. We're a blessed nation. We're an exceptional nation, and that's why God is always on our side. That's again, that was something that was really picked up after the Second World War and utilized, because the new enemy was communism. Our wartime allies were now our enemies, and this is an area again where Hollywood plays as a big role, because during the Second World War, Hollywood was used to make heroes out of the Russians. You had movies like Mission to Moscow, The North Star, these things, and that made Russians out to be heroes, even defenders of democracy. Literally, on a dime, they became the enemy. And all of a sudden, Germans, you had movies in the 1950s, because coming out like The Good Germans, movies about Rommel. These things where there were good Germans now, who were opposed to Hitler, who are now part of the post-war West German government. And so these movies are being produced. And all this is being coordinated by the National Security Council, the CIA, and Defense Department directly into Hollywood. And this isn't just something that's done by accident. This is all being coordinated. I believe it was what's interesting is MGM played a big part in this. It was called the National Security Council had the Operations Coordinating Board, and this is where the Joint Chiefs of Staff met with Hollywood bigwigs, and they came up with an idea how to come up with slogans and movies, and they formed a group called Militant Liberty. It was a doctrinal campaign approved at the highest levels of the Pentagon in Hollywood, and this included people like John Wayne, John Ford, the director.
Yeah.
And, so it's all been coordinated, all these movies. And like I said, during the 40s, Hollywood was used to paint a positive picture of Stalin's Russia. After the war, they used to demonize Russia.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I have it here.
It's like flipping a switch.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, oh, they're a bad guy. Now they're a good guy. Well, you know, me and John in our discussions, we refer to politics as having all these parallels to world wrestling entertainment. And yeah, you have the concept of the heel, you know, and the baby face and the heel. Well, it's the good guy, bad guy. And that happens throughout the trajectory of a wrestler's career, where they can switch back and forth between being the villain and being the good guy multiple times, you know, like Hulk Hogan did it. And it's just a lot of parallels there. Well, even Donald Trump was actually directly participated in world wrestling.
I was
pageantry.
listening to someone talk about, they're comparing politics to professional wrestling. And said in the old days, professional wrestling took itself seriously because if you were a bad guy or a villain and a good guy, you never were seen together. You never went to parties together. I mean, out of the ring. You never socialized and all that. Politicians don't even have that discipline. You know? They go to the same parties.
Yeah.
You know,
like why? You could pull up all the pictures of Donald Trump hanging out with Clinton, and they look pretty chummy. I mean, at the golf course, hanging out with some nice-looking models at some kind of a event, some function, and their wives nowhere to be seen. Interestingly enough, and they look like they get along pretty good. I mean, as far as I can tell. But they're during the campaign, man. I mean, wasn't it like Donald Trump wanted nothing more than to see Hillary Clinton in prison? Wasn't that the story? And that is I don't know how any more closer you can get to pro wrestling than that without starting to hit somebody over the head with a folding chair. You know, it's like what more, you know, do you need? Well,
it's just like when he shaved Vince McMahon's head. I mean, in reality, they're friends, despite the fact that we watched him shave his head.
Yeah.
Although I would pay to see Donald Trump shave Hillary Clinton's head. That you know.
I don't know why not. I mean, I make it. Actually, I would have to say that as far as all the campaigns and the elections go, I think the most recent was probably one of the more entertaining ones that I can recall. Yeah.
Definitely more interesting than Obama versus Romney.
Oh man, yeah. Oh, that's that's no good. Yeah, it's they got to have, and I think it's probably hard to have the politician that's actually a good character, even to the point of being a caricature. And I think you got it in spades with Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton, I don't think she's much, as far as that goes, she's no slouch either, you know. She has this vibe about her that people like love to hate, that sort of thing. And then at the same time, for some people, for some reason, like they really latch on to her. It's really something.
Regarding Hollywood, this is a part out of the cultural Cold War, and what I'm going to contrast here is how Hollywood is used as a weapon in culture creation, culture manipulation, also for geopolitical reasons, or because in this case you have the studios being utilized in a way at different purposes, for two different purposes within 15, 20 years. I'll read this. It says, but C.D. Jackson's most valuable asset in Hollywood was CIA agent Carlton Alsop. Working undercover at Paramount Studios, Alsop had been producer and agent working on the MGM lot in the mid-1930s. Then with Judy Garland in the late 1940s and early 1950s, by which time he had already joined Frank Wisner's psychological warfare workshop. I mean, just think about that, psychological warfare workshop. They're targeting the American people, okay? And in the early 1950s, he authored irregular movie reports for the CIA and the Psychological Strategy Board that was in the Eisenhower administration. These reports were compiled in response to a double need. First, to monitor communist and fellow travelers in Hollywood, and second, to summarize the achievements and failures of a covert pressure group headed by Carlton Alsop, charged with introducing specific themes into Hollywood films. Okay, Alsop's secret reports make extraordinary reading. They reveal just how far the CIA was able to extend its reach into the film industry, despite its claims that it sought no such influence. One report dated January 24th, 1955, concentrated on the problem of black stereotyping in Hollywood. Under the heading Negroes in Pictures, Alsop reported that he had secured the agreement of several casting directors to plant well-dressed Negroes as part of the American scene without appearing too conspicuous or deliberate. Sangaree, which is shooting doesn't permit this kind of planting, unfortunately, because the picture is a period and laid in the South. It will consequently show plantation Negroes. However, this being offset to a certain degree by planting a dignified Negro butler in one of the principal's homes and giving him dialogue indicating that he's a freedman and can work where he likes. Alsop also reported that some Negroes would be planted in crowd scenes in the comedy film Caddy, starring Jerry Lewis. At the time when many Negroes had much of a chance of getting into a golf club as they had getting the vote, this seemed optimistic indeed. They were worried because the Soviet Union was using America's racial issues as a sort of a cudgel to criticize the United States, its claim of being a free nation, and so they were trying to project positive images. Although this had nothing to do to really address the reality of the situation in the United States, but they wanted the important thing here is the image, not the reality. But what's interesting about it, that's MGM Studios, and of course MGM Studios was also the studio that produced the black exploitation films of the early 70s. And these were directed by Gordon Parks. He was a black man working for Time Life. And, of course, that's Henry Luce and C.D. Jackson. And he directed the Shaft films, Superfly, these things. And apparently these films were, again, a more or less a black op, a CIA operation. Jim Aubrey, who was a bigwig at MGM, was a CIA asset. And the idea of these films was to produce films promoting the stereotype, the black criminal, the pimp, sexually irresponsible criminal behavior, to promote that in the black community, to further erode the black family, which was under assault at that time, big time. What's interesting is that, of course, this is consistent with Time Life being utilized for culture creation, because Time Life also promoted the drug culture. 1957, you had Gordon Wasson, the Life magazine cover promoting psychedelic drugs. Of course, Life magazine promoted a lot of things: teenage pregnancy, drug use, the sexual revolution, goes on and on and on. And also just promoting the idea of Americana. You talk about Henry Ford's museum. Well, the Time Life empire was huge in creating the idea of what American life was all about, because it produced Life magazine, it produced Time magazine, that was for the news. It produced Sports Illustrated. It produced Fortune magazine. So it had they were covering all the bases about what the good life was supposed to be like in the United States. But what's interesting is, why would Hollywood produce these films? To promote this behavior. It was intentional to promote further degradation in the black community. Because by this time, what was called the Black Jewish Alliance had broken up in the mid to late 1960s. This kind of gets in what we're talking about, what's going on, sort of the iconoclasm in the South right now, this sort of spasm of iconoclasm destroying these old Confederate memorials that have been standing for more than a century in some of these cities, like New Orleans, which define the city, define its character.
So they're raising these memorials. They're completely eradicating them. Yeah,
which is you're redefining the South more or less, and in the process demonizing and also promoting a totally skewed, inaccurate historical account of those events. But then there's the civil rights movement. Of course, the history we've been given of the civil rights movement of the late 50s and early 1960s is that it was progressive, just, and necessary, because the South was irredeemably racist and backward, and needed to more or less be occupied, and reform needed to be forced down their throats. Otherwise, blacks would have been denied their rights forever. Now, spearheading the civil rights movement, no, obviously there were racial problems in the South. I'm not denying that. I mean, as there were throughout the rest of the country, particularly how blacks were treated. But I just don't think social engineering was the answer. But nevertheless, spearheading the civil rights movement were Jews, the Jewish community. Martin Luther King had Stanley Levinson. In fact, he was more or less Martin Luther King's handler and fundraiser. In fact, there's some people think he's the one actually penned letters from a Birmingham jail. But this enmity towards the South on the part of the Jewish community can be traced back to the Leo Frank trial. Leo Frank was a man living in Atlanta, Georgia, a Jew, who was the local head of B'nai B'rith, which is interesting. I think factored into how this trial was handled and how events unfolded. He also managed a pencil factory, which employed many locals, many young girls. One of the young girls that worked for him, Mary Fagan, 13 years old, went to go pick up her pay one weekend. I think it was on a Saturday, and never returned, and her body was found. She been sexually assaulted and strangled. Leo Frank was indicted and eventually convicted for this crime and sentenced to death. In the process of the trial, he tried to railroad two black men for the crime. It wasn't successful. Now, in the process of the trial, the Jewish community closed ranks behind Leo Frank. Newspapers in the North, papers like the New York Times, started to slander the South, call it backward, primitive, unable to give a fair trial, and also anti-Semitic, which is interesting because anti-Semitism wasn't even a factor in the South. In fact, the Jews were always treated very well in the South. Many Jews played prominent roles in the Confederacy. Judah P. Benjamin was their Secretary of State, and the Jews have always, had deep roots in the South because of their role in the slave trade. Interestingly enough, but anyway, even people like William Randolph Hearst were enlisted in the anti-South cause in defense of Leo Frank because he was apparently threatened with a boycott if he didn't support the agenda. So the South closed ranks, particularly in Atlanta. They became very defensive, but nevertheless, the Jewish power structure was able to bribe the Georgia governor, I think his name is Governor Slater, to grant clemency to Leo Frank in lieu of a new trial, despite the fact that all his appeals had been exhausted. I guess they were confident that they would eventually get a new trial for the man. But this caused outrage. There was a protest. I think the governor's body was burned in effigy. And one night, a lynch mob was formed, and they went to the jail where Leo Frank was, and they dragged him out and hung him. If they lynched him, they hung him. They hanged him out in front of Mary Fagan's house as a message. But this was the the origin of this enmity that the Jewish community had towards the South. And it was also when B'nai B'rith created the Anti-Defamation League, ADL. And it was also roughly around the same time that the NAACP was formed by the Spingarn brothers, who were Jewish. It was always a Jewish cause. But the point is, yeah, there are real problems in the South, but these problems were identified as problems that could be exploited to weaken and destroy the South as a separate culture, because of the fact that the South had Atlanta, Georgia, the South, they had put Leo Frank on trial and resisted this media attempt on the part of the North to get Leo Frank off for his crime because he was a member, he was a Jewish Freemason, B'nai B'rith. But the point is that it wasn't, the desire here wasn't to address the problems in the South to improve the situation. They're using it to exploit the problems in the South to destroy the South.
So now the NAACP was created at the same time that the ADL was created, roughly the same time, yeah for the same general purpose.
Mm-hmm. But but we, most of us get the history where, Jews were just very progressive. They supported the civil rights movement, but by the 1960s, it had broken up. Largely over, there was a teacher strike in New York where basically the blacks in the unions were sick of taking orders from their Jewish handlers, and they rebelled. And there's a book by Harold Cruz that details this. And just at this time, these movies started coming out of Hollywood.
Yeah.
To promote, black degenerate criminal behavior. Not to mention what's going on in the Great Society, right? With the destruction of the black family.
Full-blown cultural warfare, definitely. And that is sort of not seen as anything nefarious. Nowadays it's always this kind of the idea that Hollywood is to entertain. When you brought up that Mr. Smith Goes to Hollywood earlier, and what came to mind, it was just kind of a realization that I got from us discussing this just now, is that back to Washington D.C. Not to change subject again, but just to throw this in there, as far as it exists today in our modern day, I would say that the Washington D.C. and its architecture and everything that's there that represents like the Capitol building, you see that a lot on television. You see the White House on television. Mm-hmm. As it operates today, is more of a stage prop than anything else for the average person. That is a lot of people don't maybe necessarily would travel there and see it firsthand. I'm sure a lot of people have, but then there's a lot of people who haven't. Maybe they don't really maybe have any real interest in going there. If they have a vacation, they want to maybe go to the beach or camping or something like that. So that Washington D.C. may not be the first thing on their mind, but they are going to be exposed to it. And I would reckon to guess that the majority of people that their exposure to it is through television and film and movies. So that you're talking about film, it's like that is how I think the majority of people have all this imagery catapulted at them through film, but what it amounts to, and I believe it even extends beyond just that aspect of it as far as being a stage prop, because I believe like the president is, for all practical purposes, is an actor. There is no way that you can have this individual Donald Trump running a country, and I just posted an article.
Yeah, so
you saw that where John
golf.
sent me the one where he's where they're reporting on him watching like several hours of television in the morning, like Fox, and they say he's watching too much Fox News. That's the problem. I said, well, isn't it the problem that he's watching several hours of television a day, and then like where would you have time?
I know. I don't have time to do that.
No, who's got time?
Between my full-time job and doing a podcast, I don't have time to watch any television. Really?
Well, yeah. It's like, how does this guy have time to watch all this TV? It's like, I just thought it was, I don't know. It just struck me as hilarious. Why do you got to go to comedy? Why do you got to go to comedy when you got that? Where it's like, I don't know. It just really struck me as funny.
Well,
and then,
just my point. The reason why I brought up the MGM case is because we have a case in the 50s where MGM is there creating a false image of a positive role for blacks for cultural, political reason. MGM Studios. Then within a decade and a half, they're doing the exact opposite, where MGM is employed to degrade, create a negative view of blacks in the country. You see, and all this is done through the medium of entertainment, film. But it just shows that one way or the other is it's being weaponized to manipulate our perception of reality, or change our perception of reality, to manipulate our behavior. And that just shows, and all this is done in close coordination with the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, yeah, you brought up C.D. Jackson. I've talked to him about him before, how he was instrumental in the handling of the what's referred to as a Zapruder film, and that the according to what I was looking into and accounts about that whole situation with that, the one piece of footage that shows Kennedy's head being blown apart. The first time that anyone had ever set eyes on that was when the Jamieson Film Company, which is regarded as the Hollywood of Texas, which is a full production studio in Jamieson, Texas. Or is it Jamieson, Texas, or is the guy's name Jamieson? I forget. But anyway, yeah, C.D. Jackson was all up in that and handling the Zapruder film, and of course his background is in psychological operations, and that's an interesting note on as far as how interwoven all of this is with Hollywood and filmmaking. And I myself personally, I know that like a lot of people wouldn't go this far with it, but I was like, I mean, you really have to wonder about like as far as the idea if presidents are actors to it can be bestly defined as an actor, and then you could take into consideration too that Kennedy took every weekend off and went to Martha's Vineyard. So was he really running the country? I mean, did he actually pose a legitimate threat to anybody that's actually in power? I really strongly doubt that. So then the idea would have been, so then the question is, why would he need to be assassinated for real? I think it's more, if you take it into consideration, the manipulation, and just like you referred to with how it was both barrels were pointed at the black community, and it's like, well, how so? How was it? How are they brought down? How are they decimated? It was through culture. Mm-hmm. How important is that to our understanding of the whole system and the operation? Well, I think when you take these things into consideration, and you think it too, it's like, well, what exactly is a president, and what do they represent as far as in an abstract way to the majority of the people? I would think that when you're witnessing an assassination, because I think this is important to bring up, because with all these cultural reference to Trump being assassinated being thrown at us now. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that predicts he's going to be assassinated necessarily, but there is a reason for that. There's a reason why Snoop Dogg's coming out with a video. There's a reason why Marilyn Manson came out with a video. There's a reason why that so-called comedian Kathy Griffith came out with a graphic depiction of Trump being beheaded. There's a reason for all of that. It keeps getting invoked over and over, and then they act like
shocked when there's a reaction to it. Oh, was this too far? Well, obviously, I mean, come on, think about it for 2 seconds. Maybe, obviously, you're gonna get that reaction when you pretend to cut off the president's head on television.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, what would happen if, like, Ted Nugent had done that with a depiction of Obama, like he had, and
like a lynching
tweeted
or something.
it, like a lynch. I don't think that would have had the same response. I think you would still be hearing about that daily to this day. But like Ted, he's obviously not. He's not no idiot. He's not going to do that. But
that's one thing. We talk about their whole racism charge. How that's actually primarily used against the black community. They just don't. You got to think 3-dimensional in these things. You don't want to. You can't look at these things 2-dimensionally. You got to look at 3-dimensionally. How that does. But if you look at the assassination, talk about Kennedy's assassination, in the 1960s, and Michael Hoffman writes about this as there was an occult sort of element to this, where just the assassination itself, just sort of the revolution of the deed, how whether or not Kennedy posed some sort of threat or ran afoul of some powerful interest, him and his brother were killed. So was Martin Luther King, and of course, in the 70s, you have the attempt on the Governor Wallace. These things, the whole assassination meme served a cultural agenda,
Yeah, definitely. That's
in
what I was
each case,
driving at.
In each case, if you examine it, there's deep state actors in these things. Because the official narratives are just absurd. They don't really stand a moment's scrutiny. But the whole mayhem they created, like Martin Luther King, and if you really want to divide and conquer, you want those race riots. So you want to build up King and tear him down. You want to build up the Kennedys, the Camelot myth, and tear them down. These things, and you want a public execution, and they got that with Kennedy. Both Kennedys, and so the assassinations themselves, I think, were part of not just what they might have achieved in a standpoint of policy or something, getting rid of a troublesome politician who wasn't going by script. It's just the assassination itself set the tempo for the decade into the 1970s.
Yeah, and then there was some different interesting cultural phenomenon going on with the Beatles coming in at JFK Airport. It was their first arrival in the United States, and that is very culturally significant.
Which is largely staged.
Event.
I mean, the screaming girls are paid.
No doubt, yeah. And then, but that was kind of like the watershed moment for this cultural shift. But that was interesting that it came sort of right on the heels of the Kennedy assassination, and it was like sort of this soothing balm, I guess, where it was like, okay, this is this distraction that can be brought in. It's sort of this positive spin on this whole thing. There's nothing but adulation directed at this so-called British, and they call it the British invasion too, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
And there's also was a very popular, what was a band that was very popular around that time too, but they were from the United States. They were the
Beach Boys?
The Beach Boys. There was the, darn it. But they would dress up in, Paul Revere.
Paul Revere and the Raiders, yeah.
Paul Revere and the Raiders, exactly, yeah.
Mark Lindsay,
and it's just interesting how they were overturned by the Beatles, just totally overshadowed by the Beatles, and just how that all played out. It was just interesting how, where it was almost like, in a way, it was okay. So you had the killing of the king, and then you had the British invasion. And it was this big cultural shift, and it was almost kind of like this, in a way, the way the narrative played out was almost like, well, here's a recapturing of the lost colony back to Britain, but by way of a cultural coup of sorts, sort of thing that was being played out. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's written up like in the great rapprochement that occurred in the 19th century between Great Britain and the United States, when Great Britain realized it would have to utilize the United States to maintain its empire, particularly as it sought to take on Germany and Russia, the continental powers. But in pursuit of that objective, there's a huge cultural program put into place, and that's why you had like the Pilgrim Society and of course the Rhodes Trust, idea of bringing Americans over in England and educating them, indoctrinating them in the British ways over there at Oxford. You had the Union Now movement and these things. I think it was George Washington. Mount Vernon was revitalized through the Pilgrim Society, which had connections to the Rhodes Circle. And if you go to these places, there's a big emphasis on the colonial period, which is of course British. Same thing if you go to colonial Williamsburg, which the Rockefellers more or less built. John D. Rockefeller II, I think, or was it the third maybe, who paid for that revitalization. There's a huge colonial theme there, showing our connection to Great Britain, and although Americans are taught to think of Russians and Germans as the chief villains. It was the British who burned the White House.
Yeah,
who chased the president out of James Madison, Dolly Madison out of Washington, D.C. And the other ones that burned the White House. The only thing saved from being burned to the ground was a huge rainstorm came and put the fire out. So that's So you in the 1960s, of course, the two world wars were completely, the United States was dragged in for the benefit of Britain and also Zionism. Of course, British Empire and Zionism are very closely connected. But then in the 1960s, of course, it took on a more of a cultural emphasis, and then you got that, of course, with the British invasion, they called it.
Right, yeah, and then it was the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and then swiftly on the heels of that, the hippie movement, the bringing in the drug culture, the free love. That was, I think, a huge pivot point for the direction of culture, society from that point forward. And
none of that's spontaneous, because obviously,
no.
If you look at the sexual revolution, of course, you have a war, and war always does this. It disrupts family life. How do you get the farm boy back on the farm when he's seen gay parade, as this World War I song went. But really, it was in the late 40s with the promotion of Alfred Kinsey by the Rockefellers and by the Ford Foundation. The promotion of people like Alfred, of the beatnik poets like Ginsberg. They're being promoted on television. You have Margaret Mead, of course, married to Gregory Bateson, CIA, promoting Blue Lagoon. What do you call it? Blue Lagoon sociology, or not sociology? What do you call it? Anthropology. Blue Lagoon anthropology, promoting free sex, free love. And all this is directed at the American people to promote this sort of thing. And of course, at the same time, you have, I mentioned earlier, Time Life promoting drug use in the May '57 edition, psychedelic drugs, and the overt use. Obviously, LSD was all CIA. It was a big CIA project from the get-go, and the mass dosing of society through these Dionysian rock festivals, just the promotion of these rock festivals. Not every American went to rock festivals and fornicated in the mud. Most didn't, probably. Most American youth weren't even hippies. Nevertheless, that defines the '60s, right? Because it's promoted by corporate America.
My aunt, she was, I think, would be regarded as a hippie, but she wasn't full. From what I understand, she wasn't like really that into it, but then kind of adopted the trappings of it and everything. And I think probably now she would maybe be regarded as sort of a progressive type. Mm-hmm. That I think that had a lot to do with establishing what would be the modern version of what would be liberalism or progressivism or whatever you want to call it. But look at what you're saying. Like that didn't necessarily mean you were gonna just blow your mind out on LSD and roll around in the mud naked and fornicate all day and all that. That necessarily didn't follow. But I think that with a lot of these cultural movements, I think we're undergoing one now currently with sort of Trump being this push forward against the left again, so that they have something to rail against. And then I think too, what this does is that it produces this sort of incentive, or this call to go even more radical. Mm-hmm. And go even further, so that you start to entertain stuff before that were maybe previously regarded as taboo. And then you're seeing like the leftist blogs promoting pedophilia, stuff like that. And I think that that you have to go in a more extreme direction, or that's what is being called for. And we're seeing more of sort of a hyping of this opposition to this perceived racist or perceived, representation of oppressive patriarchal culture that needs to be shouted down. It needs to be protested against and exhibited against, and then you have to have something that represents the further end of the spectrum as far as an extreme, and that has to be. Now I think we're currently going through a phase where it's even being pushed further. So you got the left, it has to go further left to be in, well, that's how it's being defined. That's how you be in opposition to this perceived threat. And then you have the right, I think, going further left to accommodate, because this is always part of the dialectic is to make compromise, make concession. And that we've seen that. We've seen that happen, certainly with the cozying up to the gay culture and all that, with the right wing currently doing that now.
Milo.
With Milo, and then I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was even inevitable that he would. I'm not going to say the guy was directly coming out and advocating pedophilia per se, but definitely going into that arena. Definitely, no doubt about it. And then he is a representative of the right, oddly enough. So, But then I think that is the whole purpose. That is the whole intent. That's why Trump won. Maybe a lot of people won't agree with that, but I certainly think that is what we're seeing here. Because what really pushes me in that direction too is like going into the punk rock discussion with John Nino and the guys over that Four Horses Asses of the Apocalypse is the name of the blog, which is going into a lot of the punk rock stuff and analysis. And that is, I put it in a plug-in for them. But that is what characterized the whole left punk rock, that whole cultural movement and stuff like there was what you had as the pushboard was Ronald Reagan, and then he was this caricature of what was representational of white oppression, the establishment, the sort of middle class establishment order. And he personified that in every conceivable way. And that was what you look at all the punk rock posters and not just punk rock, but of course, but then I think that was sort of like to the extreme end was representational of that. But then they had the posters of Reagan being just a continual theme, like portraying him in all kinds of derogatory ways. And then as to say, this is the Goldstein that we're supposed to scream at the telescreen for our 2 minutes of hate. Trump is a reiteration of that, and I think it's important that he came after the 8 years of Obama. I think that's important to take us in the direction where we're going to go next, and that's further into the acceptance of the stuff that's being currently pushed now. That's why that we're seeing this come. You saw Bruce Jenner come about sort of pre-election, and I think that was sort of to make preparation for the advent of Trump, oddly enough, because that was all to be the next phase, so that you have to bring in this next phase, which is they've already incorporated gay culture, gay identity into accepted as normal, to the next phase, which is transgenderism and all the other stuff that's being now peddled. And I do believe that it was integral to the whole operation to have a representation of so-called white oppression to be the pushboard for this. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly what we're seeing. We're seeing all these major pop stars coming out, being very shrill, being very over the top. We're seeing this with of course, Kathy Griffith again. And what is this supposedly? Well, now, what possible even justification can there be for this in any other context that we have this person, this persona, in the so-called highest office of the land, which we just got through talking about, which he watches a lot of TV and plays golf. Is he really a threat? No.
Oh man!
No, but he is the playing that role, and he's playing it quite well, and that is the function that he serves. That, as far as I'm concerned, that is his primary function. There's a reason why he needs to watch television all day, is because that's where he lives. That is his that is his environment. That's where he's going to be engaging. That's where he's going to be acting out his role. So TV. So you say, well, couldn't he get better intel from like the CIA? Certainly, they have even stuff that individuals can subscribe to that are. What was it, Stratfor, that came about the same time Alex Jones popped up on the scene, oddly enough. He actually had Stratfor employees working for him, which is this, it's represented as this sort of news aggregation that comes out from intelligence agencies and the Mossad and all these other outfits that represent the, intelligence apparatus out there, and that you could subscribe to, right? So if you're in business and all that, you can get up their upper leg on all the good intel.
The fact that that mainstream news, the mainstream networks, CBS, ABC, developed directly out of the wartime intelligence agencies. Sarnoff, Perley, these, so
good point,
Walter Cronkite, they're all wartime psychological warfare intel guys, So it's not too surprising that the alternative media might have the same origins, at least huge portions of it, because it's a very sophisticated psychological warfare. They're gonna have even in outfits that they're any outfit of any size, sophistication, I think is infiltrated to one extent. It doesn't mean you can't use them to get information from. It doesn't mean they can't be entertaining or useful to a certain extent. But you have to be very very skeptical that these things are being tweaked or massaged for some sort of psychological warfare objective or political objective. I mean, CNN and it's completely controlled by the Pentagon and CIA. So it's,
sure. Yeah.
So I don't know why people are even shocked by the accusation that some of these other guys might have some connection to it. It's just the way it operates. You get all mass communication has always been coordinated by the powers that be. But you mentioned punk rock and these guys being countercultural. The fact is that the counterculture has always been a corporate creation, and the sad irony is that those people who indulge in that have no idea that they're supporting the very establishment that they think they're opposing. There's nothing more pro-establishment than going out and using drugs, because the establishment is the one that imports the drugs. It's the banks that pocket the money that you pay for those drugs. By being a sexual revolutionary, you're supporting the corporate oligarchy, because they're promoting those things for a reason. They want to destroy your identity. They want to destroy you, because when you shred morality, shred self-control, you enslave yourself to your passions, and you become a helpless victim to the blandishments and and propaganda and advertising that the corporate state has to offer. There's nothing more radical than simply going out, getting married, staying married, having children.
Yeah.
There's nothing more radical than that, 'cause that's the most radical thing, most subversive thing you can do, is just go out, have a family, be a good person, be loyal.
Or be like, take it to the extreme, like a listener of mine, a long-time listener, Damon. He's got I think he's got 9 kids now.
Yeah. And there's nothing.
That's radical.
That's radical.
That's extreme. Yeah.
Going out, using heroin or smoking pot that the CIA imported. You're not radical. You're a tool. You're a corporate tool. I don't care how many colors you dye your hair, how many nose rings you have. You're buying that from. These things are made by DuPont, and the hairspray you use, the hair dye you use. Nothing more No, there's nothing more You're just a tool. That's the irony of it all. It's always and they think they're being radical, by getting a tattoo or two or body art or shaving their head or cropping their hair. No. You got it all wrong. You got it backwards.
Right, it's the exact opposite, or it's something that's been pushed on people through culture, and it is, if you can kind of step away from things and look, I'm almost 50, and I've seen a lot of societal change in my life. I don't think I'm that old. I was born 69, which is the moon hoax thing going on. But since then, like, how much has changed? How much has been transformed? And then I would say that more change has happened. It have to be within the last, probably since the 90s. Than has, of course, then if you have to factor into how aware you are, but I mean, just going back and kind of refreshing your memory on just looking, just researching and stuff, and it's like what you actually live through, it's like there's been more cultural and societal change within the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And probably the previous 40, that I've lived on this earth. That might seem like an overstatement, but I don't necessarily think so. I think there's been, with the advent of the internet and how it's completely kind of transformed people in general. Oh, yeah. I'm just looking at a site, aggregated news site, and one of these headlines is, "Test your LGBTQ history knowledge." What? Did you test yours? No, I just had a rainbow flag, a bunch of shirtless guys on it. I had no interest in. Yeah, I think that's like, why. Isn't June Gay Pride Month or something? Yeah, I was talking about that on last call, and then I typed it in to Google, and then of course I don't know why I was taken back by it, but the whole screen and everything exploded in rainbow colors, and it's like, what the hell is going on? It's like, that's gay. Yeah, gay. Oh, definitely confirmed. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is how I was just the only times I ever see like normal news coverage. Years ago, I just decided never to read a newspaper regularly ever again or watch the news regularly ever again. I figured I'd be better informed if I didn't, and I was right. Because that's a distraction. In fact, there's a quote from Jacques Ellul that you had that I want you to read, and we'll talk about that. But what this function of what the news does to us, or attention spans. But we had a gay pride parade locally in the city, and the coverage is just all praise. It's like, they had a float with a inflatable unicorn jumping over a rainbow, and there were all these shirtless guys running around hugging each other, and the news report is just glowing. And like, it's like the greatest thing ever. It's like the V-Day parade or something. Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of people, even today, watching that, are creeped out by it. Still today, and if I would venture to say even gays themselves, yes, like sort of mainstream gays, are creeped out by it. Because in thinking, look at this. Like, this is the I mean, come on. Yeah, it's just it's. And that's the whole thing with that. It's become every other day. It dominates the news, some issue, and it's got nothing. It's not what most people. It's not relevant in the vast majority of people's lives. It's not useful from a news standpoint, but it is useful from a psychological warfare standpoint. One thing that you did mention is good example of how deep this is on your hoax on your last call. You had a guy mention that the case of Jim Miller, who interviewed Osama bin Laden. Okay. And he the guy was he a CNN reporter that went over and at the time it was ABC, him? I think. Pre 9/11, obviously. Because you mentioned the 4 horse asses of the apocalypse. Yeah, 4 horses asses of the apocalypse. So I went to that site and they had a rundown of his pedigree and who he married. Very interesting. This Emily Altschul, this family, very elite, wealthy family. Okay. So this is a reporter that got the scoop on the most elusive man in the world. Like the FBI and the CIA couldn't find him, but this cat knows right where he is and go has a chat with him.
This is a good case study of this manipulated news. If I could find in my notes here. A recorded interview in May 1988, a little over 2 months before the U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, shows bin Laden answering questions posed by some of his followers at a mountaintop camp in southern Afghanistan. In the latter part of the interview, ABC reporter Jim Miller asked further questions. Of course, Jim Miller, born 1958 or 59, is the Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism for the New York Police Department. He's a former Associate Deputy Director of National Intelligence for the Analytic Transformation and Technology, whatever that is. Prior to that, he was an Associate Director for Public Affairs at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where he was the Bureau's national spokesman. Miller is also a former ABC News reporter and anchorman. That's kind of a strange mix, right? Perhaps best known for conducting an interview with Osama bin Laden in 1998. Now, he married Emily Helen Altschul. Were married, I guess, in 2002. And the bride, 36, is on the board of the Overlook Foundation, a charity founded by her grandparents that makes grants to environmental, human rights, educational, and other groups. She's also on the board of the National Public Radio Foundation in Henry Street Settlement. She graduated from Barnard and received a master's degree in education from Bank Street College of Education. She's the daughter of Dr. Siri von Rees of New York and the late Arthur G. Altschul. Her mother is the author of Love and Suicides at Sonzeki. But I believe at the Full Horse's Ass of the Apocalypse, this is what J. Herbert Altschul said, I think her grandfather. The history of press demonstrates that the newspapers and more modern variations of the press have tended to serve the selfish interests of the paymasters, while at the same time perpetuating the image of a press operating in the service of the consumers of the news. To expect that news media will make a dramatic U-turn and scoff at the wishes of the paymasters is to engage in the wildest kind of utopian fantasies. He wrote that in Agents of Power, the role of news media in human affairs. J. Herbert Altschul was the bureau chief of the Bonn office for the Associated Press. Bonn, Nordrhein, Westfalen, Germany, instructed writing seminars in Johns Hopkins University, wrote freelance in many publishers, including Reader's Digest, New York Times, news analyst for King TV, won 3 Emmy Awards, of course. Now he says, I intend to demonstrate with this post that Mr. Altschul's aforementioned thesis is correct by pointing out that the propaganda of the Altschul family. The Altschuls, I believe, represent both demographics, media and paymaster. I researched one branch of the Altschul family, found an entire century's worth of media manipulation, banking, and propaganda, spanning pre-World War I to MK Ultra to Operation Mockingbird, all the way to 9/11 and today, which makes Jim Miller's role in the whole Osama bin Laden hoax rather interesting. But if you go to that site at the Four Horse Asses of the Apocalypse, they give a whole rundown of Jim Miller and the Altschul family. It's very interesting, to say the least. And so he's all these jobs, deputy commissioner, New York PD. He's an anchorman, but of course he's able to find Osama bin Laden. But of course, no one could find him. Of course, allegedly until 2011 when he was allegedly taken out.
Yeah, you ever see that photo that was going around? I thought that was pretty hilarious. It was presented as being like a screen capture from footage of the night vision camera on one of the helmets of the super soldier that went over there and killed that decrepit old guy sitting in it was like it was off of a video game. And it was like they superimposed, like it was one of the wounded guys that were carrying out, and they superimposed his face.
Yeah.
And it was floated around the internet for a while as being an actual screen capture of footage from the actual raid. I thought that was really interesting. It's like, okay, this is, if I'm recalling this correctly, it was either from a movie or a video game. I can't, but yeah, thought that was interesting.
What was that when the Russian hacking story when they showed like a graphic from Was it from a video game or something? The news?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it was like a video. Yeah, that was a video game, I think, where they showed a graphic of a video game to represent. No, it's actually, I have some other examples of that too. There was a British news report that was like, they literally had footage of a first-person shooter video game running as they were reporting some kind of skirmish over in Ukraine or something. And I have that. And it's, of course, video game graphics are getting so good that it's like, it's hard to tell at first blush, especially if it's kind of blurred and you're like, okay, and then it's like, but if you're attentive to it, it's like, oh, that's video game. What the hell? It's video game footage. But I was, and I got to thinking about that later, and I said, the overwhelming majority of people aren't even going to take note of that. They're not even going to even wince at that. They're not even going to, it's just going to go completely right over their head. They're not even going to notice that it's video game footage.
Yeah, they're going to think they saw something. That reminds me of during the Boston Marathon bombing. I think the governor of Massachusetts, DeVal Patrick, was in a press conference, and he said he claimed he saw a videotape of the Zanarinov brother dropping the backpack that allegedly had the explosive device in it. And he thought he saw it because there was a news reenactment.
Yeah.
Because there is no videotape of them dropping anything. But he thought he saw something. At least he said he saw something. Maybe get it out there. So supposedly he thought he saw it on videotape occur. And I'm correct because he says that everyone watching that news press conference or reporting on it, we're going to think that many people still today probably think there's a videotape of that happening, and there is no.
Well, I guarantee you, if you took a survey of people that consider themselves kind of up on events, I'd be willing to bet that you would have probably the majority say that I do recall seeing that footage.
Yeah, because it's all fake, and that's. I think John Adams sent me a quote from Alvin Toffler's book, War and Anti-War. And there's a part of a section called Unreal, my cord here, Unreal Real Time. And he let me see with this quote. I think this kind of captures what we're talking about. It says, the news media change, the new media change not merely reality, but even more important, our perception of it, and therefore the context in which both war and peace propaganda contend. Before the Industrial Revolution, peasant populations were illiterate and provincial, relying on travelers' tales, church dogma, or myth and legend of their images of events distant in time or place. Second wave mass media brought distant places and time into closer focus and gave a "you are there" quality to what purported to be news. The world was pictured as objective and real. By contrast, third-wave media are beginning to create a sense of unreality about real events. Early critics of television lamented its immersion of the viewer in a vicarious world of soap opera, canned laughter, and false emotions. These concerns will seem trivial tomorrow, for the new media system is creating an entirely active world to which governments, armies, and whole populations respond as though it were real. In turn, their actions are then media, processed and plugged into the fictional electronic mosaic that guides our behavior. This growing fictionalization of reality is found not only where it belongs, in sitcoms and dramas, but in news programming as well, where it may promote the deadliest of consequences. This danger is already being discussed around the world. The Moroccan newspaper Le Matin in Casablanca recently carried a thoughtful essay quoting the French philosopher Baudrillard to the effect that the Gulf War came across as a gigantic simulation rather than a real event. Mediatization, the newspaper agreed, reinforced active character of events, making them seem somehow unreal. The irreal quality was amplified during the Gulf War by what amounted to television of television, TV2 as it were. Again and again, one saw video images of video screens showing targets and hits. So important was media imagery considered by the military that, according to one U.S. Navy commander, pilots in actual combat sometimes reset their cockpit video displays to make them show up better on CNN. Some weapons, too, it turns out, were more telegenic than others. Thus, harm missiles zero in on enemy air defenses and are tiny pellets at them. But the damage they do doesn't show up as well on television, with the camera wants our big bomb craters and on runways. What's interesting, and then he goes on to say, basically the public increasingly media sophisticated as time goes by, and then hopefully grow more skeptical as well. I'm not so sure about that. But of course, we have the skeptical of CNN faking Scud missile attacks during the Gulf War. We have other examples of these things. But the whole idea of the weapons being telegenic, I understand that during the 2003 assault on Iraq, CNN or some of the networks actually added the sounds of explosions because from where they were filming, you couldn't hear anything.
Oh yeah. I'm sure that's standard practice. I've that's a subject that I go into pretty extensively. I intend to follow up on that. I was kind of just putting it on the back burner because I called this attorney at the FCC, and he was cordial enough to give me some information. Did I post that on the blog? I don't know. No, I didn't post that because it really wasn't that informative. It was he referred me to a court case, so I wanted to do a follow-up call with the court case, the Seraphim versus the FCC, which is about an individual that was going to sue the FCC in order for them to not renew the broadcasting license of CBS. So that's how you have to go after the media. So his contention was that they misrepresented the Bosnian people as far as they characterize them as being sort of Nazi sympathizers, something to that effect. I'm not sure. I might not get all the facts right. But anyway, the point being that he was attempting to sue the FCC to prevent CBS from getting it. And far as I know, I thought I had that printed out right here, but I don't. That go. When was that? That was either the late '80s or the early '90s. But as far as I know, and that's what this attorney told me, is that this is the only instance of that where it's like, okay, so, and the question being is, what I asked him initially and what I was investigating was, okay, what law are there on the books that prevent the media from just blatantly putting out false information and making up stories? Like, is there any penalty under the law for such a thing? There was a conversation I did have with a lady that worked there. I forget her capacity, but anyway, she was telling me that there's all these criteria that have to be met in order for the media to be in violation. And one of the things was that you have to demonstrate a direct harm from putting out a false news story, injured party, and then you have to, demonstrate that it was directly related to that, false information being put out. As well, that's very interesting. So that, no, I mean, so actually, in reality, there is no law. Like, say, a lot of people may reject fakery or the idea maybe Sandy Hook was a hoax or something like that, but you should also take into consideration that if that was done, there is no laws against it. There is no law out there against the media just blatantly putting out just hoaxed and fake information. As to date, as far as I can tell. Now, the bar that's set for having their license revoked is very extremely high. It's like you have to, because in the Seraphim versus FCC case goes into that where, you can read through this case and like what had to be proven, what had to be established in order for their license not to be renewed. And it was a very tall order. It was like they had to establish intent, that they intended to deceive, and not only that, but intended to do harm, and then have demonstrable harm that they could present to the court in order for them. So there was all this stipulations, all this criteria, and of course he didn't win the case.
No, yeah.
because CBS is still around. They're still pumping out propaganda. And yeah.
Well, that gets to the true nature of the corporate media. Of course, emphasis on the word corporate. When you have 90% of the media being controlled by 5 or 6 corporations that are interlocked, obviously it's going to promote the news that's produced. What's presented as news is going to promote an agenda that's favorable to those corporations. I don't think you have to be too conspiratorial to suspect that. If CBS or ABC is owned by a corporation and also has major stock in, say, Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, you might see news that's going to promote a war, or at least national security concerns, constant excuses for interventions that result in the use of military hardware, so that has to be replenished. Same thing, you don't see much criticism of pharmaceutical companies on the networks, because the pharmaceutical companies, which are interlocked with the defense agency, defense contractors, have an interest in making sure that people, take their drugs or take their get their vaccine shots and these things. So you're not going to have real coverage in the mainstream media, the corporate media, about the controversies and questions that tens of millions of Americans have regarding these products or regarding foreign policy. You're not going to get experts or academicians who are critical of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, critical to the extent that they oppose rampant intervention everywhere. If you can be critical of some type of U.S. foreign policy, at the end of the day, you have to support the empire. You have to support intervention. Whether it's soft power or hard power, one or the other, you're supporting intervention at some point. The media, the fact that the corporations benefit from these policies, the news media is always going to make sure that it promotes those policies. And in fact, you could say they have a fiduciary responsibility to do that to their stockholders. They have no legal response, as you said. They have no legal responsibility to the public, nor these psychopaths who run the corporations ever recognize any moral responsibility to the public, who they see as just the people to be fleeced and exploited.
Yeah, there's another court case too with I'm sure you've heard about this one, where the reporters tried to sue the employers. The title of the case is New World Communications of Tampa Inc. versus Acre 866 SO 1231 from 2003, where they were going to put out a story on bovine growth hormone in milk.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
And they were saying, nope, you're not. And then they said, well, yeah, we worked on this and we want to put it out, and it's true, and we've done all the legwork on it. And they're, the head guy there at the station said, you're not going to run the story, but you can run the story, but we're going to have, the industry attorneys go over it first. And of course, they just gutted the story. And they're saying, no, we don't want to, this is not even our story. We don't want to run this. And they said, well, you can, don't let the door hit you on the way out, which is eventually what it came down to. And so they said, oh, we're going to sue our employer because for some reason they were under the impression that they had some obligation to tell the public the truth. And it was like the judge set them straight. Says, no, you have a job and then you do that job. That's it. That's not your job. So more or less, it just kind of spells it out right there. It's not their job to tell the public the truth. Their job was to do what their boss told them to do, which is everybody's job when you go to work for a corporation. And just like you're saying, that is the prime directive, is to be beholden to the shareholders. And so it's not illegal to flagrantly lie, to misrepresent something, or definitely, I think a lot of probably the bulk of the reporting where it's deceptive is that it's through omission largely. Because I think when I'm discussing fakery and stuff on Hoaxbusters call like that, it's like it's important to point out that it's like you have to distinguish myself from maybe some individuals out there that I'm not going to name, but that will take the position that just absolutely everything is fake and a hoax, and that's not true. It's just not true at all. But you're going to get, of course, painted in that with that same brush. Mm-hmm. That, you know, and then also you're a flat earther on top of that now.
Well, yeah, you have the everything is fake crowd, then you have the everything is real crowd.
Yeah, but then, yeah, that's another thing, too. I like to turn that around. So you think everything is real. So the stuffed teddy bear that talks to you and hawks you toilet paper is real. He's real. It's like, no, I never said that. Why are you saying that? Why are you telling me that I'm saying everything's fake? Obviously don't believe everything is fake. But now you were definitely going to get put in that box. And especially now, if you say the moon landings were fake, you're going to be called a flat earther, because that has been pulled off quite well through the association building that's been underway on the YouTube. But yeah, it's kind of another subject. Have you ever broached that topic?
But regarding the moon landing?
No, the flat Earth.
Oh, flat Earth? No. I've listened to it, and it's. I think it's it's just an attempt to suck more of the oxygen out of the room.
Oh yeah. That's well said. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But
I don't know what it achieves, but it's definitely takes a lot of time. If you do
it definitely does. Yeah, it's definitely a wormhole of. I know black holes exist, because that's an example of one where it just sucks people's energy and time away from them.
I think it's equivalent to the UFO conspiracies.
Yeah, it's a lot like where it kind of goes into the arena of just pure speculation, which I definitely really try to avoid that area. But of course, I'm going to be labeled as in that camp, which is like, is that such a concern for me? Not particularly, but at the same time, I want to distance myself from a lot of the kind of complete departure of logic and common sense that seems to be attached to a lot of stuff that's out there. You know what I mean?
And another thing regarding, you're talking about media control, and this example of how these networks are just corporate and controlled by the intelligence agencies, because the intelligence agencies ultimately work for corporations. That's who created them, the big banks, Wall Street, and these things. But I was reading in the Cultural Cold War about Tom Braden, and he's one of these figures. If you zero in his career, it's a typical figure where he went to work for the CIA, worked for the International Organizational Division, which ran the Congress of Cultural Freedom, which published all these books, and like a Counter magazine published thousands of books, ran festivals, music festivals, promoted things like modern art, these things. That's how the CIA did it, to promote freedom. The idea is this: we were so free that art wasn't even restrained by any aesthetic standards anymore. That was the idea behind the CIA promoting modern art. Of course, I think also was a agenda of culture degradation. That's why the Rockefellers got into it so much. But Tom Braden was involved in the Congress of Culture Freedom, and he decides to, quote, leave the CIA. He retires from the CIA, and the chapter closes. When he retired from the CIA, Nelson Rockefeller bought him a newspaper. He became the editor. And I know what the author is saying in that. Like, okay, right. I'm sure he's retired from the CIA, and I guess a lot of people know Tom Braden through his role on Crossfire in the 1980s, when he sat opposite Pat Buchanan and they barked at each other, arguing left and right.
Yeah, but Tim, let me stop you there. I think you're mischaracterized. Wasn't Nelson Rockefeller kind of known for that? Like he'd give away like Elvis gave away Cadillacs. Nelson Rockefeller gives away newspapers. I mean, that's just what the guy did. I mean, come on.
Of course, in the TV series 8 is Enough. It was based on.
Yeah, I remember that.
Tom Brady.
I remember that being on television. I didn't like the kid with the bowl cut. I didn't like that kid at all. I don't know.
The little one. Yeah, I remember him. Yeah. I always liked the pretty blonde daughter.
Oh yeah.
She stuck out.
It's like they're definitely going to have eye candy on the any television show like that. But eight is enough, and that was a representation, if I recall correctly, of a divorced remarried couple.
I think no. In that story, the first wife died.
His first wife dies.
Yeah, I believe.
But then his second wife has a bunch of kids too, right?
Yeah, the Brady Bunch was the whole idea of the melding of two different families. Right, which
was important. You think about it, it's like, okay, so you're going through the sexual revolution, and then sort of the fallout of that is you're going to have the advent of the divorce rate start to escalate. So you have to incorporate that into your television viewing so that you have this normalization of it.
And they weren't divorced. They were both widow. When he was a widower and she was a widow.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So they couldn't quite
point
do
because that was right. But then the idea was there of
blended families. And you got
definitely,
that of course later on you get Full House, which is just even a crappier show, but still just odd.
Has there ever been a show like a actual show about a couple that just happens to have a big family?
I'm trying to think, TV series?
Yeah, TV series
the
where
Waltons,
it's just
right, the Waltons.
Yeah, but did they have how many kids do they have? Like maybe did they have 3 or 4 or
there was 6 or 7, I think.
Oh, really? That many? Okay,
and that was early 70s. And
I guess that would be an example then, but that would be early 70s.
That was taking place in the 30s. A show in the 70s. The show took place in the 30s during the Depression, which is a whole nother, goes back to the whole mystic chords of memory stuff, the whole idea of the Depression and what life was like. Of course, TV was comparatively so benign back then. It's never been benign, it just appeared benign. They have to pull you in. But did you ever see that clip on YouTube? You could probably look at it, the Brady Bunch, where Bobby and Cindy want to go skinny dipping with a family next door.
No,
It is
no.
the oddest
that was
thing.
an episode with that.
I don't remember. I watched that. Well, I remember it when it was still on primetime in the mid to late 73, 74. But like most people, I remember watching it in syndication. I never saw this in syndication, but apparently if you go on YouTube, there's a scene where Bobby and Cindy walk into the kitchen, and of course you all know how the kitchen was laid out, and there's Alice there in her typical blue, dress with the apron on, Alice doing her Alice thing, and they're wearing bathrobes. And he says, "Alice, we're going swimming next door." "Okay. Hey, Bobby, did you get your new suit your mother got you?" Opens the robe up. She goes, "Oh, you're not wearing anything." And I'm not kidding. And he says, "We're going swimming next door. They swim with nothing on. They all do it. It's like adults." And I don't know what to make of that. If you go on YouTube, you'll see it. It's still there.
So that's just right there in an episode of Brady Bunch.
Bunch.
Matter of fact.
Unless someone's really done a good job of manipulating the video, but it doesn't look like it. It looks like it's original. I'll send you the clip. I think it's still up there, but it's really weird. It's creepy as all.
Yeah, there's some pretty risque stuff in some of those early sitcoms that you wouldn't expect. Yeah, and they kind of just drop it in on you, where it's just, oh yeah, hey, by the way. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, there's an interesting episode too. If people are looking up Brady Bunch, look up Brady Bunch measles.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's another thing. It's kind of a glimpse into a more saner time, perhaps, about these things.
Or they're like, "Yeah, you got the measles." Did they freak out and then rush them to the hospital? Which, if some child had the measles now, there would be panic in the streets. Isn't measles supposed to be highly dangerous? I mean, they're told about that, but it's like, no, back then it was like...
They were trivial childhood diseases. In fact, they're not trivial because getting measles plays a big part in building your immune system later on in life. From what I understand, it plays a big part in building cellular immunity in your adult life so you don't come down with cancer when you're 45 years old.
Oh, really?
So if you get inoculated for it, and you never experienced as a child, you don't get the benefit of cellular immunity. but but the doctors don't make the connection when you're getting, why you have cancer when you're 44 years old. These things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never heard of that.
But there's actually these things are beneficial to get when you're young, and they used to have measles parties, things like that. I had measles. I had chicken pox when I was a kid. I mean, it's just something you usually get it when you're 4 or 5 years old, and you stay at home from school for a week. That's okay, because most of school at that age is BS anyway.
Right? Yeah. And people kind of understood that too.
Yeah.
There wasn't kind of this overemphasis on a lot of stuff that there is now, and it was like, yeah. And I can recall a lot of that too, being a child in the 70s, and it was definitely different. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It was just kind of as society, culture progresses, as it's called, it's just it is more emphasis on things that prior, as to my recollection, just didn't. The emphasis wasn't there. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, and then it was more of. Well, I mean, just example, like a lot of people point this out too, is like I remember my little brother laying on the back of the back seat of my mom's was an Oldsmobile, big heavy car, and then he would always ride up on the back seat, laid back there, stretch out, because he's
now
only
the kids are
he's only
strapped in
4
like
years old.
astronauts. The kids strapped in
Oh
like
yeah,
astronauts.
they got like a helmet on and a car seat, 4-point harness, like literal 4-point harness on a car seat for kids.
I think in this state you have to be 24 years old before you can get out of a baby seat. So,
Huh?
No, I'm
Really?
joking, of course.
No.
It's like, what are you talking? It's like 9 or 10 or something. Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous.
Now they really have them up to 10 years old.
No, I think it's like 8 or something, 7 or 8.
8.
And I haven't kept up with it. It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, well, I mean, I joked about helmets, but I don't know if that's not coming. I don't know. Like it and then at the same time too, I'm totally 100% convinced if they could do it on the Indy car track and they could do it on the NASCAR track, where it's like you have essentially death-proof cars, where you could take a wall at 200 miles an hour and walk out of it. Like what? How? It's always too expensive to do in a passenger car. It's like, I don't believe that.
They could make the cars a little heavier.
But yeah, they should make them bigger and heavier.
Yeah, but then they have fuel economy, which dates back to the fake oil energy crisis of the 70s, right? All that dates back to fuel economy standards, which are all based on the contrived oil shortages.
Unless you want to pull up some old PDFs, which I have, that talk about 200-mile-per-hour carburetors from the official Ford Motor Company documents and stuff. Yeah, I got a 200-mile carburetor testing out, and it's all right up on it. Well, I believe it's Ford or something like that.
Well, the petrodollar plays a big part in managing the world economy, so you can't have that happening.
No, that's not acceptable.
I mean, was it Volkswagen has a diesel engine, gets like 80 miles or something to the gallon that they won't let import in the United States?
Right. As we speak, people in Europe are tooling around in 80 mile per gallon diesel VWs, right? Yeah. But we can't have them in the USA. At the same time, we're going to hear lectures from our glorious leaders about too much carbon, blah, blah, blah. Is it Peter Trudeau? Golly,
Trudeau. Oh, you mean the
Prime Minister of Canada.
The boy Prime Minister of Canada?
Yeah, the boy wonder Prime Minister. So I posted up a thing where he's swearing the oath to the Queen. I thought that was very interesting, because that's what they do, the Prime Minister of Canada. But then
it's meaningless, though. It's meaningless. Right?
Oh, it's totally, yeah, all right, yeah. That's not. What is the oath then? I mean, yeah, what I mean, but then it's I guess it's all ceremonial, right? It's not, doesn't really mean anything. But then there was a video, and this recommended videos on the side, and watch that for a minute, and it was like, of course, somebody he was taking questions from the audience, and then one lady was really upset about, there's new carbon taxes coming to Canada, and and I'm watching this and I'm thinking about it, I was like, I guarantee you this guy flies around private jets regular.
Mm-hmm.
So I put his name in and put private jets, and certainly, it's like anyone. And I'm like, who really are these people? Like this Justin Trudeau, right? These people like him, and then, okay, this guy's first saying is all these articles. He's tooling around in private jets with Saudis, and it's like, well, what is this? And then it's like, what are we looking at? And I came to this realization too when me and John were talking about Sean Penn meeting with the drug lord in Mexico, that
El Chapo, yeah.
El Chapo, there you go, yeah. And I'm thinking, okay, these are the sort of arrested adolescent children of the elite that play these roles.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, they're just going around, dicking around on private jets, going jet setting around, getting hookers,
mm-hmm.
Screwing off, making an appearance here and there because that's their job. They go, and then they get on television and do the swearing in. And then he probably was immediately, would not surprise me whatsoever if he was immediately hightailed it out of there, got in a limo, went off to go to a whorehouse, a casino or something. That's who these people are that's put in front of us. They're like, they said Kennedy was like that. He was a philanderer or a playboy. Mm-hmm. They say Trump is like that. Clinton definitely, no doubt. That was the funniest thing I heard that Webb Hubble is actually Chelsea Clinton's dad.
She looks like him.
And but one thing, like, was Bill Clinton said, "Yeah, I'm sterile." It's like, oh, certainly he's gonna put that out.
Yeah,
Bill Clinton. He wants all the ladies to know he's sterile. But yeah, who are these people? They're just. Why do they all have those same reputations? Because they're like the arrested development children of the elite that get to play these roles, and then they get to go goof around and fly around in private jets and go check out El Chapo and his operation and get the good dope. And I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong, off base on that, but that's just a picture that gets painted in my mind when I'm trying to envision what actually really happens behind the scenes, because I really don't believe Justin Trudeau is running shit. I just do not accept that. I do not accept that Donald Trump is running anything. I just cannot accept that.
Yeah, I was reading a piece by Miles Mathis about Elvis Presley, and he made a few points in the what was his idea is Elvis Presley was an intelligence operation, the same as the Beatles were, to degrade and promote create the conditions right for the sexual revolution. And within this article, he's talking about music and stuff. They did it in the 50s. Of course, they did it long before the 50s. So they did it back in the 1920s. The 1920s, the Roaring '20s, were sort of like the prototypical sexual revolution. And they tried to promote it back then. They said they promoted it with suffrage for women, the suffragettes. And it says, now, don't get me wrong, I support equality, women's rights, and these things. But listen, the vote is useless. It says, the vote is useless now, and it was useless back in the 1920s. They can allow people, they can give women the right to vote, because those who run the country can always steal enough votes to get in office those they want to promote their agenda. And it says all that voting did was promote family breakup, family division between the sexes, because prior to that, men voted for their family, and it was sort of. But even interesting enough, before women had the right to vote, campaign slogans and ads were geared towards women.
Oh, yeah.
Because they influenced their men. So, but he's saying, all it did is make women agitate and be whiny and almost as dumb as men. And it says the fact of the matter is our vote means nothing. So it was a way to give the illusion of giving them empowering women, at the same time actually further enslaving them by weakening the family.
Now, what was this out of? I'm sorry.
He has an essay on Elvis Presley as an intel op, as a sort of a just a creation of the same way that people theorize about the Beatles or the Grateful Dead and things like that. It was a setup. It was a setup. Interesting. It makes a good case for it. Cause I have to admit, I read the article, but his overall thing about the manipulation of culture through popular entertainment. This is what the oligarchs do. This is how they control the middle class, by beguiling them with entertainment. We're entertaining ourselves to death. Other people write about this stuff, but they just don't draw the conclusions. There's a book called Entertaining Ourselves to Death, which is pretty much about the same thing. It's just, from what I understand, is it doesn't have the conspiratorial conclusions to it. But
Neil Postman.
Neil Postman, yeah.
Yeah. That's really, I would totally agree with that about voting. It's like, well, what actually does it do?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's always the question that I want to get at, is like, what is the impact? What does it do? What is going to be what is the end result? And then when you said that makes total sense. That it causes division, even in homes.
There were women actually they're the anti-suffragettes who made that very argument. They said, no, this is a decision taken by the family. The family has certain interests, and it's represented by the father. And the reality is, in the context of a familiar relationship, the father's going to take into account the concerns of his spouse. It's not just patriarchy. This promotes the whole myth of patriarchy. These things, how men are lording over women all the time, and they go out and work 12, 14 hours to support them.
How the hell does anybody get that idea? I mean, in reality, that is never. I mean, when has that ever been? When has women not have significant influence ever in history? That has never been the case. Yeah, that is a total.
They could stop
myth.
wars if they just cut off sex to psychopaths. But too many women are attracted to psychopaths because they're the winners. They have money, right? I think
so. It's actually the women's fault.
Yeah,
that's what people need to understand.
Well, Catherine Austin Fitts makes that point. She says if you simply stopped rewarding the a-holes out there, the psychopaths, and rewarded moral behavior, you get a lot less violence out there because you wouldn't reward these people. And then so much about acquiring power and money is ultimately gets down to sex, I guess.
Yeah,
it's stopping rewarding them for it. You might get to change of behavior. I mean, remember it was World War I. This is prior to conscription in Great Britain. I think conscription was imposed after the Battle of the Somme, and they took so many casualties. But prior to that, men had to volunteer to join the expeditionary force battling on the continent. And one way they did it was there was the white feather movement, where women would walk around and hand white feathers to young men who weren't in uniform, getting them to sign up, shaming them to sign up. That was the function of women in Great Britain, getting them you're a coward if you don't go to the trenches and go over the top and get mowed down by automatic weapon fire. You're a coward. And I was reading about it. There's actually some awkward moments because oftentimes there'd be soldiers at home, on just visiting back home on relief. On what do they call it when you get
leave.
Home? Leave. And they wouldn't be wearing uniform. They're handing white feathers. One guy was injured 3 times.
Yeah, he gets a white feather anyway.
He gets a white feather. He got in the press, and perhaps they stopped doing it. But also they imposed conscription, which was a huge thing at the time in Great Britain, because Britain prided itself not having to do that because they had the Navy. But it's an example of, again, women out there shaming men to go out and get slaughtered.
And they did it. I mean, but then see, it's kind of the modern feminists will say, well, it's all war is laid at the feet of men, and it's like, well, no, and it's always been the case. Is like, the influence and the usage of women, of course, for the status goals, and the voting thing. It's like it's never been an actual power that anybody's had. It's only served to divide. That's the only thing that's ever served to do, is to divide people.
Yeah, I mean, a good example is the presidential election, right? Many Americans think they have a right to vote for president. They really don't.
No.
The manner in which the electors are chosen, the Electoral College, are determined by the state legislature. So technically, any legislature could vote tomorrow and say we're now appointing electors to the Electoral College. and there wouldn't be any casting ballots for electors. That's who you vote for when you vote for president. You vote for an elector. And what this would do, if that were to happen, it would take voters out of the presidential election process, which I think would be a good thing. I think the states, if the state because we vote for our state legislature, and so if you vote if there's a Republican majority in Florida, they'll appoint a majority of Republican electors, and a Republican will win the state of Florida. That's I kind of like that system compared to the current system where you have this 18-month election cycle.
Well, I think then too, it's all kind of predicated on this notion that there are these individuals out there that you want to have make decisions for you, and then you've never actually even had lunch with any of these individuals or ever met them in person. Mm-hmm. It's kind of it's really, I think it's from my perspective it's absurd. I have no belief whatsoever in voting. I don't think that it has actually ever been anything that was influential as far as the way things go in any sense of the word, as far as the way culture is being driven, the way whatever. No,
because the culture will determine the voting.
Definitely,
so
and
really
that's always been the case.
Controlling the culture.
And then we've been told that too. I mean, that's been in the words of Edward Bernays and other people that have just come right out and said that flat out. That's what drives and influences people is this, through manipulation, and then you're going to use psychology, which is just nothing more than the study of how the human brain or what people react and respond to, and then you kind of can tap into some sort of I don't want to say primal, but something, kind of base level desires, things like that, where, that's definitely something that is being utilized to manipulate the masses. But, but I would say that is, like, as far as the sciences go, that is one of the most advanced science, is the study of the manipulation of human beings. Yeah,
that was in Christopher Simpson's book, The Science of Coercion. Mm-hmm. He researches gets into the history of the study of mass communication, and it was never an independent study of mass communication on its own. Like the study was conducted, paid for by the Pentagon, by the intelligence agencies, to study how it can be weaponized from the get-go. And this goes back to the Princeton Radio Project and Orson Welles' broadcast, The Halloween Eve of War of the Worlds. It was done as a test. And the whole discipline of communication, mass communication, is done for the purposes of weaponizing it, for manipulating the masses, not informing them, not studying how it develops organically or independent, or how it interacts, through certain historical contingencies or accidents of history. No, it's been a weapon from the get-go. It was developed for that very purpose.
I think, going into a lot of this, it's almost as if there's, like, maybe you or I have this belief that everything is sort of nailed down, locked down, and absolutely controlled. I really don't believe that at all. I was watching something about it was some commentary on that recent Bill Nye, his series and stuff like that, and how that's from a lot of what I'm hearing, that's been an abysmal failure on just every conceivable level. So it's just universally panned. It's something awful. Was that the intent? I don't think so. I think that there is something that goes into making a production, and the people at the top, or whoever you want to point out, that would be they're pulling the purse purse strings, obviously, because people get funded, and to have a show and to have that much exposure requires that you have a great deal of financial backing, which is going to put you back to what you were referring to earlier about this corporatism kind of driving everything. Well, they can only do so much. They can fund it, but they can't make it go over well.
No, yeah.
And I think that was intended, maybe not necessitated being such a hit, but I think it was intended to go over better than it actually did. And that would be an example of where not all this stuff that's thrown at the public is going to take. And I think too that there is like backlashes that are happening in a lot of areas culturally against a lot of the stuff that's being like rammed down our throats. I don't think it's only the transsexual agenda. I think that's like, with what do we see with organic food popping up everywhere? Like, why? It's like, is that the intent of the people running things, that we have healthier food? No, I think that it is as an outcome of demand, people wanting that and seeking that out, and being aware of what, becoming aware of what actual food is and what, denatured food is, And so, yeah, I think the idea, I like to put that out, that it's like, I don't, even though I'm not saying that a lot of this stuff doesn't have influence, I think at the same time that it's not a case where the masses are sort of this mass hive of, automatons that dance to this specific tune that's being played by this small cadre of individuals. I don't necessarily buy into that, but at the same time, I believe that these are long-term plans that are being carried out, and so that there's all this built-in flexibility, so that there may be some part of the agenda that needs to be driven forward, and then you have a failure, and then you double back, and then you regroup, and then you go back forward again. I think that's a big part of a lot of the strategy that's being played on us as, the average person. And I don't think that, there is no...
When you have all the money in the world, in fact, you create the money.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So that's the important thing. You're actually creating the money, so you can buy up all the resources, buy up all the corporations. You can't engage in sort of this corporate coordination that involves entertainment, government, politics, sports, these things. I mean, you see it at ESPN, you see it in Hollywood, you see it in movies. So that's going on. But you can afford to make mistakes, because at the end of the day, you're using everyone else's money to do it. So you have all the money in the world, all the time in the world. So there's no skin off your nose if something doesn't work. Go back and do something else in the process. Yeah, it's worked a little bit, perhaps. And you can always go back and manipulate the reaction. That's the dialectic or the trialectic.
True. Yeah.
So you can, I think we've seen a lot of that. I think in the alt-right, where some of the reaction I support and understand. Some of it I think they're being manipulated, and some of them are just actors or just infiltrators. The whole development of white nationalism is a response to decades of anti-white agitation and propaganda. That it was designed to get that very reaction. The problem is you go out and you blame your immediate enemy without looking at who's pulling the strings. And the action is in the reaction. And you create more divide, more hatred. And that's all done, At the same time, you demonize things like ethnicity and community. The sound basis for community would be ethno-religious. But we're told we all have to be diverse. And if you have any ethno-religious identity, you're a bigot.
Well, let me ask you this, because I was thinking about this as far as the whole topic of immigration. I mean, would you say, because I know that you're very conversant in history as far as immigration goes, isn't it typically, not always, but typically brought on as a byproduct of some war or conflict?
Mass immigration. Yes.
That's what I mean, mass immigration.
Yeah, it's weaponized migration. Kelly Green has written a book about that. This is a strategy of this is geostrategy. It's statecraft, and it's been a weapon. I mean, that goes back to the latter stages of the Roman Empire with the Mongol hordes. In Asia forced this migration into the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th century, which caused a lot of problems in the Roman Empire. But that might not have been planned. But yeah, the weaponized migration that both within nations and with intranationally and international has been used. In the United States, it was done in the 1940s, ostensibly to get labor up north into the war factories, into the factories to produce for the war effort. But behind that was also a plan to weaken labor unions and break up the ethnic Catholic neighborhoods in certain cities, because they weren't seen as being particularly loyal or not trustworthy, because they were either German or Italian, but they were also Polish. And so the one common theme was they were Catholic, and this was part of the WASP plan to break up the ethnic neighborhoods to change the demographics, ultimately to direct the country's politics, because you had such large birth rates among the Catholics, because they didn't practice contraception, whereas the Protestants had taken on contraceptives in the late 1920s. So they called it differential fertility. So there was a concerted effort to break up these neighborhoods, and of course at the same time, I think Adams has talked about this a lot. This whole creation of suburbia, and the 30-year mortgage, FHA, and the interstate highway system, which is a government project, which is all part of social engineering to create suburbia, to create this sort of this denatured, deracinated white middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had to break down the ethnic Catholic identity, particularly Catholic, because the baby boom was primarily a Catholic phenomenon. So that had to be changed.
Right, yeah.
And you also had the Jews who ran Hollywood were also subjected to the Hays Code, the production code, which was largely a Catholic thing, and it was enforced via the parishes in these ethnic neighborhoods. So you had multiple agendas playing out here, and when you had this diaspora into suburbia, the people lost their Catholic identity, and they're no longer attached to a certain parish. And then it wasn't too long after that the production code collapsed in the mid-'60s, and you had all the normalization of pornography and the sexual revolution. So this whole agenda is being played out by various factions that have different interests. There's the WASP Jewish Alliance of the post-war era. And you're also working with the Supreme Court. This gives a lie to our system of law, because the court itself is ratifying all the oligarchs. Because you get the decision was Bergman v. Parker, which ratified urban renewal. But urban renewal was the destruction of urban neighborhoods under the cover of getting rid of blight, urban blight. Urban blight was just the neighborhood that you didn't like. In fact, they actually paid photographers to go in and kick over trash cans to take pictures of it and put it in Life magazine. And this all part of this fake reality we're talking about. At the same time, you had, I think, the Roth decision regarding obscenity. It became a constitutional right, freedom of expression. Prior to that, these things were controlled by local police powers. So you had the destruction of local authorities and maintaining some sort of moral standard in the community. And this is all promoted in the sexual revolution. At the same time, you have TV coming online, and the music that we mentioned earlier with promotion of rock music and drugs. So it's all happening, and you have to be a wacko coincidence theorist to think all this is just by accident.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's like nothing unfolds this way and by nature, and if it's just by accident, there'd be examples of counter coincidences checking this stuff. Not to mention that all this is being promoted by the establishment, by all corporate America, by Madison Avenue, by all the foundations. Of course, we mentioned Kinsey being being supported by Ford, and also the Rockefeller Foundation, also the University at the University of Indiana. The universities are supporting this stuff. Universities are totally integrated into the intelligence and military intelligence, because this is the era of MK Ultra, and all the grant money, all the research money is all based on government dollars. This is the GI Bill. Nothing is happening spontaneously or organically. It's all being manipulated. And at the same time, the colleges are being filled with all these cultural Marxists, because this is the cultural Marxists came to the United States from Europe, and after the war, you had this explosion of universities, and all these offices were open, and they're all filled with cultural Marxists, and they all point to each other. There's a huge amount of if not ethnic nepotism, ideological nepotism. They're all promoting each other, and they were there to fill the ranks of the colleges, and the government's there to subsidize the college educations with debt, by the way, subsidized debt. So the generation that went off to fight World War II are sending their kids into the colleges, and it is in these colleges that they'll learn to hate their parents, because they're being taught by the cultural Marxists, and they're being taxed to pay for this. This huge expansion of the university system, which is a huge control mechanism.
And then so we're witnessing this now. We're seeing the what was that recently happened, where the professor of Evergreen State College was a professor was being threatened by the students, and his family was being threatened. He had to get away from the school. The social justice warriors have taken over the school, taken over the campus.
Yeah, it's something out of Mao's China.
Yeah, that's what it. Yeah, that's what it is. It's just something right out of what you hear about what happened was going on during the Mao's Cultural Revolution and all that, and which is Marxism, and then you'll have people throughout these university systems that are just avowed Marxists, just up front and center. They just really don't make no bones about it. And it's like, okay, what are you shocked about? Why is this a is this a problem? That's what I was asking. It's like, okay, you're Marxist, and then okay, you've recreated the culture, the shit that was going on in the Cultural Revolution. Like, what did you think was going to happen? Like, what? It's crazy. Mm-hmm. It's just absolutely insane. Like, what? But this is an issue now. It's like, what? No, what were you trying to do here? But of course, this one professor came out and said that, I mean, this is not something that is this recent development within the structure of their organization and within the college, according to this guy. But he was saying that it was, which is of course is I always going to dismiss it offhand if he's kind of pointing out, putting the blame on one individual, which essentially he was doing. But it's saying that that this one particular who is the head of what is the head of the school called? I'm trying to think. It's not necessarily the dean, is it? The dean of the college?
No, dean is a lower position. Oh, you're talking chancellor, or
the chancellor or the head of the
something's called a chancellor. And
so apparently he's saying that individual is responsible for coming and kind of revamping the organizational structure of the college. And it was previously sort of like run by the staff, the teachers, kind of like through some kind of what would you call it? I don't know. But anyway, the point being that it was all kind of laid at the feet of this one particular individual, which I highly doubt. But then again, too, like what are we looking at here? But obviously, is it a situation, do you think, where that got out of hand as far as like where they're pushing this cultural Marxism and they're getting it to its end result, but they weren't really expecting it to kind of shake out that way or so soon, or I don't know.
I think obviously you promoted a bunch of loonies going to college. They're going to go off in various directions, but I think ultimately the anarchy they want they want Mizzou and these faux protests, and they want presidents resigning, being chased off, and all this because it creates an environment on the college campus which where people really aren't learning anything and really getting these diplomas that aren't really worth much in terms of a real education, but they're being indoctrinated, they're being vaccinated, they're being actually being drugged. I think it was I read an article by recently that said 1/4 of all college students are receiving psychiatric care and are on drugs.
Wow.
1/4? Because they have these dispensaries there that, someone goes up and they
on
say,
the campus.
On the campus. And this is what your student fees pay for, it's nonsense. And, and just getting these kids into the pharmaceutical complex, getting them addicted to drugs to cope. There's any number of reasons why a person might feel anxious or depressed when they're away from home for the first time. They're only 18, 19 years old. They may not be performing well because they've received a fraudulent high school education, so they shouldn't be there. They're not doing well. They think they watch for years. They watch these college movies promoting the college lifestyle, partying and these things, and their parents did too. No, this is all part of the propaganda, promoting the college lifestyle, which is debauchery. But parents just acquiesce to this stuff. They have no problem sending their 18-year-old daughters off to go to live in a dorm somewhere where they can be ruined. And the concept of ruining someone is old-fashioned, I guess. But it happens because these people are psychologically scarred from their experiences, particularly the females. So what do? They resort to what? Substance abuse, depression, drugs, and none of the
workaholics.
Yeah. And no one can diagnose the problem, because maybe because of how you're behaving or the environment. It's a hostile environment. Maybe you shouldn't have co-ed dorms. Maybe
right.
Maybe an 18-year-old girl should have a respite from that. So she should be able to, retire to an area where she's not confronted with these things constantly, the partying and these things. Because obviously, if you have separated by section, you have less parties. So you have some peace and quiet, and that's the biggest complaint among a lot of these girls. When they live in a dorm, it's loud, and because everyone's partying all the time. But this is considered normal on a college campus, and it's paid for. Gladly paid for by parents, by the taxpayers.
So the co-ed dorms are pretty much the standard now. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're pretty. From what I understand, the norm. They're sometimes divided by floors, which is meaningless. Some are just completely co-ed. I went to a commuter school, so I lived off campus in a basement apartment, so I never had to deal with that ridiculousness.
Yeah.
Also, I wasn't a traditional student, so it's very different. But you can't consider heck, some typical 18-year-old, girl who's lived at home the whole life. Then she's told she has to go off to college somewhere, either not by her parents or that's how it's marketed, or she thinks she has to. All of a sudden, she's in this hostile environment. And this is supposed to be this coming of age. Well, it's not. It's the point where they're being indoctrinated, manipulated, drugged, and and ruined, and also being thrown into debt, all for a diploma which isn't worth anything. But they were told you have to, because in order to get a good job, you have to go through this stuff. Although it has nothing to do with your job, what you do for a
right.
living.
Yeah, well, you come to find out afterwards that you go to apply for a job, and then the first thing they're going to ask you is well, where have you worked before?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm just out of school. I haven't worked anywhere before.
Unpaid intern now.
Sorry. Yeah, you could. The internship scam, which is interesting. Yeah.
Well, think about it from a practical standpoint. If you want to do the intern route, instead of going off to college, maybe you're graduating while you're living at home. Maybe that's when you could be an unpaid intern, because you're living at home for free. And
that would seem like the sensible thing to do. Get an internship. Well, actually, I think that's probably common practice, which I would probably recommend to anybody that's going to get try to get an education, is take the minimum, get into the least expenditure as you can with school, but get in there and meet people and network, but then go, if you can, it's possible, get into the internship thing.
Yeah.
That's because I wasn't able to do that, and so it was but then there was the benefit of having, you know, made friends and meet people, and then that's how you get jobs too, you know. So that's how it worked out for me. But yeah, it's extreme going into that, and then myself, I didn't go to any kind of situation where I lived on a campus or anything like that. It was kind of like I was working, going to school at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's but then, you know, I could see where it's just a lot of upheaval and a lot of stuff going on at the same time. You're trying to perform, you're trying to get grades, you're trying to do all this, you know, work, and and I think it starts in kindergarten and it progresses into the college. By the time you're done with all that, and it's all to prepare you for the so-called working world. So in contrast, when you get into the working world, it's like a lot more laid back, almost, in contrast. So I think that's another aspect of it too, is that it's kind of like the way you go to boot camp. It's like when I went into the military, I was in the Navy for 6 years. You go into boot camp and it's like, okay, you have an understanding. You already know going in, okay, this is not what the Navy is going to be like, because there's no way that I'm going to handle this for a year, let alone 4 years. This is not going to happen. But you understand it's boot camp, so it's preparing you for, you know, doing things on time and being regimented and all that, of course. But then, you know, I think about this, it's a lot like kind of what you go through. Everybody goes through a sort of a boot camp when they're going to college or going to school, which now, interesting thing that's being implemented is that they're taking what used to be considered junior high grade, and now that's high school. I've noticed that, where that's being moved forward, so that eighth grader, you don't go through all the changing in classes like what you typically do in high school. Now you do that in eighth grade or seventh grade or something like that. But anyway, it's been advanced so that younger children start going to the high school routine, which is it's set up to be more stressful, obviously.
Yeah, the bell ringing, the crowded hallways and everything.
And the crowded hallway, and the hurrying to get to class, and I haven't eaten, and I'm stressed out, but I got to get to class, and blah, blah, blah. Where's my book? Oh, I left my dang notebook out at home. Well, you know, stress. But it's designed that way.
Even the bell ringing is like something out of
the bell. Yeah, the damn bell ringing. Yeah, and then it's like, yeah, you started your day with your alarm ringing, so it's bells all throughout the day. The bell, the bell, the bell. The stress. They're going to class, and so it's like your boot camp to go into the working world. When you get in the working world, just like when I got out of boot camp and got in the Navy, it was like, damn, this is the Navy. This is not too bad. It's kind of cool. There's regimentation, and you go to work every damn day, and you're on the ship, and you're working 12 hours a day. But in contrast to boot camp, it's like you're like kind of relieved.
Yeah.
So but if you would have went straight into it, you wouldn't be prepared. You know, you see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like going up to bat as a batter in baseball. You'll see them; they'll grab like 5 bats and swing them.
Yeah.
But when they hit the ball, they're not hitting 5 bats; they're just taking 1 bat.
Yeah.
It's like that principle, whatever you call that. But
putting the donut on the bat. Remember that?
Yeah, or put the donut on the batter. Yeah, but that's what college is. It's like, or not even so much just college, but high school too. You know, high school is pretty high stress. It's really at the same time too. Now kids got all this after school extracurricular stuff that they typically will get into. So it's like the day the typical high schooler's day is probably just jam packed.
Well, that's interesting. That gets into something perhaps we can close it out on. Is that you provided a quote recently by Jacques Ellul from his book Propaganda. talking about the function of current news, how it permits us from thinking about anything, can deprive us of any time for reflection or even a desire to reflect upon the bigger picture.
Right.
And the constant news, the news cycle, battered with one event after another. So we're never really able to look back, think, and connect the dots and understand what's really going on. This is what like reading newspapers does. This is what watching the news does. As we're constantly being traumatized with one news story after another, whether it's today's terrorist attack versus last week's terrorist attack, today's shooting versus last week's shooting, and even the media itself never really follows up on these events and provides any explanation to any questions or the inconsistencies that come with these reports. And so we never have any understanding of what's going on around us. We're just constantly in a state of fear and anxiety.
Constant, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how people handle watching Fox and CNN. Whenever I get around it, I'm just like, I could feel my disposition change. I could feel it's stressful, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's like just listening to the jabber on the Fox News. It's like okay, what you're saying, then just get to the point. Oh, the world's gonna freaking blow up tomorrow, is what you're saying. That's why I want to just shout at the TV. It's like, okay, it's just doom and gloom, and then a little bit more doom and a little bit more gloom, and we'll go to commercial break, and then there's the teddy bear talking at you, selling you toilet paper, and then it goes back. It's just bizarre, surreal, not craziness.
Yeah, here's the Jacques Ellul says, to the extent that propaganda is based on current news, it cannot permit time for thought or reflection. A man caught up in the news must remain on the surface of the event, be as carried along in the event, and he can at no time take a respite to judge and appreciate. He can never stop to reflect. There's never any awareness of himself, of his condition, of his society. For the man who lives by current events, such a man never stops to investigate at any one point any more than he will tie together a series of news events. We already have mentioned man's inability to consider several facts or even events simultaneously and to make a synthesis of them in order to face or to oppose them. One thought drives away another. Old facts are chased by the new ones. Under these conditions, there can be no thought. And in fact, modern man does not think about current problems. He feels them. He reacts, but he does not understand them any more than he takes responsibility for them. He is even less capable in spotting any inconsistency between successive facts. Man's capacity to forget is unlimited. That's the problem. When you get caught up, obsessed with today's news, without any deep reflection or analysis of yesterday's news or last week's news or what occurred 40, 50 years ago. And this gets into maybe an issue we were talking about. The mystic chords of memories, what we started talking about, is providing these myths that many people's perceptions of reality, of what they represent, what their country represents, is based on one lie or half-lie after another. And this is why it's so difficult when you're taking on an issue like 9/11, perhaps the Vietnam War, or the Iraq invasion of 2003, or the Kennedy assassination. Certain events in the Second World War, like the Holocaust narrative, perhaps, or who were the bad guys in World War II, who were the good guys in World War II, or were there any good guys in World War II for that matter. A deep analysis of these events is you'll be stepping on a lot of sacred cows, a lot of sacred beliefs, sacred myths that people have been force-fed over the years to form their own identity, of whether their own personal identity or their country, and which is why there's such what I detect when I try to express some skepticism towards official narratives is a very emotional and uninformed reaction, because it's all based on a rather superficial, I would say, sort of a comic book or textbook view of history that most people were instructed or force-fed a few years ago. They've never thought about it since. They've closed the book on it. It's form their worldview, and they're happy with it because at the same time, I think it ultimately demoralizes them. It flatters them, particularly Americans. I'm talking about Americans because I'm an American, so that's my own experience, is how Americans view their country is based on one myth after another. And they really, and so when you start talking about these events and trying to really question the official narrative and bringing up, inconvenient or uncomfortable facts or questions about them, you really get often you get an almost violent reaction to it. At least that's my own experience. And that reaction is never based on anything, and any, what I detected, an informed opinion. It's based on the propaganda they've been fed over the years.
Yeah, and then it's the event, so-called, happens, but then as it's unfolding, the initial shock comes, like on 9/11, like what the hell is going on? And then it's kind of like the thing with the boot camp. It's like the trauma, initial trauma, the upheaval, your life is upside down now. What the hell is going on? I got this drill sergeant throwing the trash can down the middle of the, between the punks. And here it is. It's like, what, it's 5 a.m. It's like, this is not good. And then, what would be the relief to come in and say, okay, we've been attacked, but hey, you know what? America and the flag, everybody, let's rally behind the flag, your country, your leader, and we're going to go solve this problem that we just now got introduced to this morning. So it's all the pre-planning started in, that the founding of the country, it's like the nation. That's the idea. The concept of that was the laying of the groundwork for whatever subsequent event would come along, historical event, whatever we want to call them, and each one shapes and build. It shapes us, but it's built off the previous series of events, and everything's got to be interpreted within those series of events, so that it's
like the lessons of Munich, Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, so all that
remember
stuff
the Maine.
All that stuff can be drugged back up and then revisited, and then I think that's part of this concept of the mystic chords of memory, so that you have these vague remembrances. At the same time, you can have them represented to you, and then that is sort of the relief phase of the initial trauma, where it's like, oh, everything's okay, Uncle Sam's here, and we're going to figure out a plan, a formula. How does America deal with this insult that we've taken upon our collective corporation? Corpus, and then that's...
Well, like when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, no one stops to reflect, or at least the vast majority of people don't stop to reflect why they bombed Pearl Harbor, why they were cornered into it, why were there ships in Pearl Harbor to begin with, why did the United States possess the Hawaiian Islands? No one goes back to the embargo, or the fact that the U.S. government had been engaged in the Sino-Japanese War illegally through the Flying Tigers, Claire Chennault. This has a lot to do with opium and things like that. Because this is the real intrigues that determine politics, the power structures in our country. Right? But most people are fed the lies of the mainstream media, the fairy tales, the stories of this two-dimensional state-to-state relationships, and really it's 3 or 4-dimensional chess that's going on. And it's not that it's beyond their capacity; they're just not taught about it. And when they're presented with it, it's such a well, to the extent that a lot of people simply don't have the patience or the interest in it, and they just would rather just have the fairy tale because it's simple. But to the extent that they do listen, often it's so upsetting because you really are you're shattering their worldview.
Yeah.
They don't take kindly to that.
I think a good question is too is like, how do you? So like we're having these discussions, and which I enjoy. I learn a lot, and then it's like, well, so what is the maybe practical benefit or a takeaway? Maybe it's like the listener can glean from this information. Like, how does it help? How does it help you? I could say how it's helped me is that so you get insight into certain things. And then you think, well, okay, you can kind of look at how a lot of things are a result of long-term planning. It's like, well, how can I incorporate that into my existence? Like, is that something that's a useful thing even for, or does it have some power, some utility, in the average person's life? I think so. I think you can kind of take a step out of the hustle and bustle and the short-term thinking that's always been inculcated to us throughout, from the time we're small children, and be kind of like more of a long-term view of things and adopt that. And I think that is like that coupled with the power of our imagination, our collective imaginations, I think are the thing that could turn things around. I'm not like a utopian or anything by any means, but like I was referring to earlier, like none of this stuff is cut and dry or set in stone or a done deal. Like the fat lady hasn't sung. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody can. I don't necessarily believe in fate or the fate being sealed, or necessarily like God has ordained a certain day that He's going to end the world necessarily. I don't think that that's the way the nature of our reality is. I think the one thing that is kind of puts that ideas aside is our free will. Do we have it or we don't? How do we leverage it to use it to make some sort of impact or make some sort of difference? Mm-hmm. I think, well, just kind of look at the way that you take in this information and see how it's like, well, what is. So long-term strategies are very powerful in getting things done. It's like, yeah. So how can you do that in your life? Thinking more long-term, I guess. Well, does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And also, well, you don't want create a situation where people's first critical thought occurs to them when they're on the battlefield and being shelled. Maybe if they developed critical thought prior to that, they wouldn't be stuck in that situation to begin with. So you want to do that. There's always that hope. At the same time, just from from an entertainment standpoint, is that history is far more interesting than the fake.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like where we're always conditioned to always kind of be maybe not so slightly, but to be off kilter, to be kind of uncertain of the future, uncertain of anything really. Not, and I think that's it's kind of positioned to where kind of people have this hope. Especially, I think that there's this tendency for always people, to have hope in the future and have hope, that's it's going to work out, everything going to work out good in the long term. At the same time, we got to understand too how that's being co-opted and leveraged to use against us in the case of when we're presented with a leader to rally behind and stuff like that. I think that's an aspect that people need to become aware of and need to become aware of just how we're all being manipulated or attempted to be manipulated. And then once you kind of achieve a good understanding of that, which I believe that I have to a large extent over the years, I've kind of got a real good understanding of the way that there are these people out there with the intent and with the goal to direct their propaganda at me, the material that they produce, their these productions, this imagery and stuff out there, with the sole intent and purpose to put me in a state of unease and upheaval.
Mm-hmm.
That is what it's designed for. So it's like somebody who is getting on your nerves. Let's say, like somebody who's intentionally trying to get at you. So they're trying to figure out ways to say things that are going to bother you. But once you understand that that's what they're doing and that's what their goal is, and they're trying to push your buttons, and you fully understand that, you don't permit them to do that. That's a good strategy. I think it's like you just don't allow. You know what they're doing, you know what they're up to, and it's like you're not going to let them win. You could do the same thing with these fear porn peddlers out there, which is what they are. And it's like they're not going to bother me. It's just not going to happen. It's like, do I know everything out there as far as a shooting or people getting run over by cars? Is that all 100% completely fake and staged? No, I'm convinced enough of it is to leave me with a default position that definitely possibly could be staged. But I know the intent, and that's to scare the crap out of me or to put me in a state of unease. And it's not going to work. I already know what's up. So how much a benefit is that? So if you could take at least that load off of you. And then I'm also something that I was concerned about ever since I was pretty young, before, when I became aware of things, is like nuke bombs. It's like, is that ever going to happen? No. I just don't believe that is a real thing in reality. Now people say, "Oh, you're crazy, Chris. How could you not believe nuke bombs?" I've seen them on TV multiple times. It's like, yeah, you've seen imagery, but you know how easily that stuff can be faked, and anything could be put on film. I mean, that was around the era when they had a 40-story tall genie on film. The Thief of Baghdad. You had not too long after that, like what was it, Mary Poppins, with like cartoon characters and live action people in the same scene, like sort of seamlessly blended. That's like, that's not real. It's like that's pretty extensive capability into faking things. So it's like, and then knowing that with the what the objective and what the goal is, certainly they would use whatever means at their disposal to put you in that state of fear, to put you in that state of unease. And certainly I think the most efficient way to do that is just to make a movie and present it as real. It's that simple. It works, and then you have less variables involved than if you were going to do something for real with the intent of making societal impact or a culture impact. Because you already know that movies work. We already know that advertising works. Why wouldn't something that was a movie presented as real work? It certainly would work. But but if you realize that it's fake, it definitely takes the edge off. It's going to take the edge right off. But
you're not going to go out and buy a bomb shelter, what you're saying?
I'm not going to even consider buying a bomb shelter, even though it may be a root cellar. What's wrong with that? No,
yeah, or
nothing wrong with that.
Tornadoes or something. You're in Oklahoma, so that might make sense.
Yeah, tornadoes are real. I know that. But I think the odds of getting hit by a tornado are fairly slim. And too is that you got to kind of take a lay of the land, and there's like a hill kind of not too far from here where the university is and the stadium is. It's like, well, I always know that's the direction the wind always comes out of. And we've had instances before where tornadoes have come from that direction, and then since there's a huge updraft created by that hill, anything coming will, if it's a tornado, it typically wouldn't touch down in this particular area because of that hill. But it's like, so that's probably why a tornado hasn't hit here. But then even with that said, it's probably not very likely anyway. But tornado. I believe in tornadoes, but not nukes. But
well, I do think they can exaggerate or fake a storm in the news reports for whatever reason, right? I mean,
for effect, for impact, and then impact. Certainly now in this day and age where they want to
But I remember New Orleans being talked as being a big risk for that just because it's at sea level. I remember it.
And then they blew the levees, which I believe probably happened, which it was a totally man-made crisis.
I mean,
would have nothing to do with that storm. Well, of course, it rained. It always rains. But
I think when you blow a levee, it was like an F3 or something when it hit the coast. So.
Which is an F3 is fairly substantial, but nothing.
Yeah, nothing like
totally out of the
Camille
ordinary.
or what was the one in the early '90s? Andrew in Florida.
Yeah, so a great example of how you can take something that is fairly routine, run-of-the-mill, and turn it into a monumental cluster F on a huge scale. Because not only, I think, that they blew the levees, they also, when the people were evacuating out of the area and going to those stadiums, it was just, of course, it was a mess. Absolute mess. But it was completely 100%, and nothing was done to really put a lot of effort to to mitigate the suffering and stuff that was going on there. With the people packed in that stadium I think it was completely set up.
Yeah, they turned away relief trucks. FEMA did.
Yeah, turned them away. They said there was all kinds of Walmart and everybody else was bringing truckloads of stuff down there. Nope, can't come in here. Nope, turn it away. It's like, that was natural. There was people from all over the country loading up trucks full of stuff and coming down there. Nope, can't come in. This is a restricted area. It's a martial law or whatever. I don't know, martial law, whatever that means. I think we always have been under martial law, if you ask me. It's just different flavors of it.
If they can suspend the Constitution in the name of emergency, then you expect you're always going to have plenty of emergencies. So that's just the way it works.
Yeah, well,
it's never been a barrier.
Our connection's breaking up, I think.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're getting garbled.
Okay. Well, it's probably a good time to call it a night, I think.
Yeah, it was a good call, man.
Yeah, it's good. Take it as a sign of God here.
Yeah, I was saying enough's enough.
Well, that is Chris Kendall, Hoaxbusters Call, hoaxbusterscall.com. Go there and check out his show and his post. Very interesting, very thought-provoking, very provocative. And so I'll bid you good night, and I'll probably be posting this fairly soon. When I do, I'll send you the link.
All right, Tim. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for spending so much time.
Yeah, cool, dude. Glad to do it. So, you have a good night. The rest of the week and everything.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Take care.
Okay. Yeah, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Chewing on a piece of grass, walking down the road. Tell me, how long you gonna stay here, Joe? Some people say this town don't look good in snow. You don't care, I know. Ventura Highway in the sunshine, where the days are longer, the nights are stronger than moonshine. You're gonna go, I know. Cause the free wind is blowing through your hair, the days surround your daylight there. Seasons crying, no despair. How the wishing on a falling star, watching for the early train. Sorry boy, but I've been hit by purple rain. Oh, come on, Joe, you can always change your name. Thanks a lot, son, just the same. Ventura Highway in the sunshine, where the days are longer, the nights are stronger than moonshine. You're gonna go, I know. Cause the free wind is blowing through your hair, and the days surround your daylight there. Seasons crying, no despair. Alligator lizards in the air.